Welcome to this Omnibus edition of Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who commentary podcast in which a special guest chooses a story for me, Toby Hadoke, to watch, and as I watch I commentate and try and guess what their favourite thing about it might be.
Hi Toby. As you can see, I'm wearing my finest Toby Hadoke tribute outfit today. My name's Matt Hayden. I train people in conflict management, teamwork, communication skills, cultural diversity, things like that. And all of these fascinating topics, I think, are examined in immense detail in my choice of story, which comes from 1985 when I was a fresh-faced 19-year-old. It's The Two Doctors, and I'll be fascinated to see what you think of it.
Well, welcome everybody. I have spent the day doing Doctor Who commentaries, but not for Happy Times and Places. This is for some BBC releases called Miserable Times. No, it's I've been commentating with people from the show for, if you're a patron listening to this, for something that is yet to be announced. If you're a non-patron, it's probably been out for years and has probably been discontinued because it is on an archaic medium. That's the difference between how far ahead the patrons are from you listening on iTunes or Podbean or one of those. So is that a little bit of a plug to say if you want to get things earlier, subscribe to my Patreon feed. If not, welcome from the past where, we still have prawns and we still have COVID, and civilization as we know it still persists. So you've heard from my friend Matt, who is not a Doctor Who fan, but he knows, he's a film buff and he knows enough about Doctor Who. But Matt is the sort of person I like because even though he's not a Doctor Who fan, he could probably he could tell you all of the Doctors. I mean, he could identify Bernard Archer at 10 paces, I should think, and yet he's not a Doctor Who fan. And I know some Doctor Who fans who couldn't identify Bernard Archer at 10 paces. Bregan in Power of the Daleks, Marcus Scarman in Pyramids of Mars. But Matt knows his stuff, but because he's not a fan, although he is, he's aware of it, and he's a geeky enough guy that if he's got a passing interest in a subject, he'll know quite a lot more about it than most people. So I think he's a really interesting proposition, and he's also a good friend of mine, and I'm very fond of him, so I wanted him to take part. And he's one of the few people thus far that has chosen a Colin Baker. I say that. I've had a few more people have chosen Colin Bakers, but haven't actually recorded their things yet. So this is only my second Colin Baker, who was, a doctor I saw when he went out. And this was one of the stories I saw when it went out. So this is exciting for me. And I know it's a story that divides people. But let us now embark. So I hope you've got you can hear my DVD menu in the background, I should think. And I do like that music. I'm on Play All, which I'm going to select in 3, 2, 1, now. Oh, and it has moved, so it's going to go. Ba-boom! Right. The first I heard of The Two Doctors, I wasn't a subscriber to Doctor Who magazine. I couldn't afford it, so I wasn't fully up to speed, but I did. I was on holiday, I think, or I'd got some pocket money, and we went past a shop in a town, because I didn't even live in a town, so there had to be a confluence of things that enabled me to get my mitts on Doctor Who magazine. It wasn't that it was in the local newsagent. There wasn't such a thing. And I would stare longingly at it and not been able to buy it. So anyway, got the hands on Doctor Who magazine. Oh, and this starts in black and white. I think that's a lovely, lovely touch. And I was very excited by this because, and I was never sure. I think part of me initially hoped that was a clip from an old Doctor Who, and it was cleverly cut in with a new Doctor Who, because just the idea that a fragment of an old Doctor Who story might be in modern Doctor Who was enough to convey greatness upon it, because anything old was good. That seems odd. Or that seems odd now, especially as somebody getting old. But well, I will come on to this. It's an important part of my digestion of the two Doctors, and I think it's an important part of the makeup of a Doctor Who fan, or this particular one. But the first I heard of the two Doctors was I bought Doctor Who magazine, and it had got the, the stories coming up are. And it said, and it mentioned the two Doctors as one of them. I don't know if it mentioned all of the stories, or whether they let them out piecemeal, but it mentioned that the two Doctors was going to be 3 episodes, and the rest of the stories it mentioned were, of course, it said, 2-parters. And I was like, what? Because obviously I'd missed the edition of Doctor Who magazine that told you that Doctor Who for this season was going to be, 45-minute installments rather than 25. So the idea that everything was, of course, a 2-parter was yet another thing where modern Who was terrible because it wasn't like old Who. Because 2-parters always seemed a bit apologetic, like Black Orchid and the King's Demons and The Awakening. I like The Awakening, but they never seemed like full stories. So the idea that a story might be 50 minutes long, I mean, who would think you could have enough story in something 50 minutes long? Seemed an appalling idea. But then, of course, I was mollified later when it became apparent that the episodes were actually longer than episodes we were used to. But I remember saying to my brother, "Oh, and they're going to do one called The Two Doctors," and him going, "Oh, isn't that idea getting a bit thin now?" Because they'd recently done the 5 Doctors, and we, of course, were aware of the 3 Doctors, and it had been repeated as part of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who. And I thought he'd be excited because, again, it's Patrick Troughton, so it's old Doctor Who. But he said he went, "Oh, isn't that getting a bit over familiar, that idea now?" It's like, oh, because I was seeking approval. But sorry, I know some people don't like me drinking, so I won't drink. I just got a bit of a dry throat. I've stopped eating in these things, which is appropriate for a story that turns the stomach. Here is Shockeye o' the Quonsing Grig, played by the glorious John Stratton, who I suspect some people still might not have put 2 and 2 together. And I was terribly shocked when I saw a piece of work I'm now hugely familiar with, Quatermass in the Pit. And I think I'd read that John Stratton was in it, and as I was watching it, because it was all edited together when I first saw it on a BBC video, I was trying to work out who John Stratton could have been, because it was ancient and black and white. I reckoned he could have been anybody, and of course he didn't have Rice Krispies on his face. But I was shocked to discover he was the heroic army captain, Captain Potter, who's the sort of romantic lead, and is rather good looking in it. I think he went to seed quite quickly, Stratton, because by the time he's rather beautiful in The Cruel Sea, a movie that he's in the late 50s as well. He has quite a big part in, alongside some cinema greats. But by the time he's in The Newcomers, a decade later, his sort of hair is thinned out. And I say that as somebody whose own hair is thinned out, and he'd got a bit rotund, and I think he was quite a sort of pallid. I know people who worked with him who described him as a very sweaty actor. I can imagine him having quite a clammy handshake, and I think he had sort of quite pallid, damp skin, and I think he had a nervous reaction to performing, which meant that he got his shirt soaked through very, very quickly, and I think he had to change his shirt. So. Yes, he was. That's my John Stratton anecdote. He was quite a sweaty man. But sadly, I was looking him up recently. His death, because he was quite a respected member of the acting profession. His death was not reported in any newspaper, nor even the stage newspaper for actors. And he was only 65 when he died, and he'd had a good career, which had petered out into being a character actor, but he gets top billing here. He's seen as the star amongst, such recognisable faces as Jacqueline Pearce and Lawrence Payne, who had been a sort of a film star. Anyway, I think John Stratton is glorious as Shockeye o' the Quonsing Grig. He's the sort of character you can sort of only get away with in Doctor Who. And here is Jacqueline Pearce. As I never had the pleasure with John Stratton. I wrote to him and never heard back, but I wrote to him, Kerry's his agent, and I wonder now if I'd been better off going via Equity, who used to forward letters to people's homes' addresses in those days, until autograph hunters made them think better of it, and now genuine researchers can't get through to actors directly. Well, it depends. It depends what mood Equity are in, but it certainly made things more difficult. Anyway, Lawrence Payne here, who had retired pretty much from acting at this point, and Peter Moffat had said, "Oh, come out of retirement to do it." Lawrence Payne, of course, had been Johnny Ringo in The Gunfighters, which was a part that Patrick Troughton was considered for, funnily enough. And Lawrence Payne was also Morix in episode 1 of The Leisure Hive, reuniting him with his Vampire Circus co-star Adrienne Corrie. The fascinating thing about Lawrence Payne is that I'm sure there's a trivia question that what links Dastari, Baigan from Four to Doomsday, and I've just got to see if there's one other. Kevin Stoney, Mavic Chen. They all have. I think Kevin Stoney only had one eye, but I'm happy to stand corrected in that. I don't know if he lost it. Anat from Day of the Daleks. So there's certainly you can, if I do some proper research. This has only just occurred to me. Lawrence, what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is that Lawrence Payne, who played Dastari, only has one eye because the actor Basil Henson and he were having a sword fight in an episode of Sexton Blake, and there was an accident, and it caused Payne to lose one eye. But what I think of Lawrence Payne in this, who I think is an actor of great dignity, and he's got that really slightly pinched accent that he has. He was from London, but he's got that sort of slightly pinched diction that he has that makes him noticeable even if you're not looking. I think you can always tell when it's Lawrence Payne talking. He reminds me here of something that was an image emblazoned in my mind from my youth, as the bloke from the video of Video Killed the Radio Star, the bloke from the Buggles, because he had quite funky glasses. And I'm sure I read an interview with Lawrence Payne where he said that those glasses were prescription glasses for him that cost about £300, whereas he'd got his own glasses that would have been perfectly done the job. And that £300 could have been sent on, say, a better set here or a better Sontarans or something. I like these scenes between Dastari and the Doctor. I think Lawrence Payne has great dignity and great sort of that controlled passion that he has. I like his lines about saying our seed is thin. That is a very nice Robert Holmes in piece of dialogue. And I love this bit, Nicholas Fawcett as the technician, who is also now there's an actor called Nick Fawcett on IMDb, also listed as not being Nicholas Fawcett. They separate them. They're the same guy, and he's still going today. And I feel sorry for him because looking at this, when he said operate the defence, I thought that was the close-up. Like when he actually only says one line when you can see his face, and the rest of him is sort of off screen because it's the Sontaran ships. But I love that it's done with such economy. They're showing how the space station is getting invaded, and what it is it's a guy playing a small part, noticing the thing, getting killed, blah, blah, blah. He does the job very nicely, and he's still acting today, Nick Fawcett, and he is Nicholas Fawcett and Nick Fawcett are the same person that IMDb does not realise. And that was the first time, and I'd loved the Sontarans since the Doctor Who magazine archive of the Time Warrior, which had some great pictures in it, and I love the image of Lynx, and there's a picture with that made me fall in love with Elizabeth Sladen, and I've always had a soft spot for the Time Warrior, and I'd never seen the Sontarans in action. And that Doctor Who magazine that talked about the two Doctors hadn't said the Sontarans were back, and I think a future issue that I didn't get must have done. So the first I knew of the Sontarans coming back was that scene with the technician and seeing the Sontaran spaceships. So I was cock-a-hoop and in seventh heaven at the anticipation now of seeing Sontarans, one of the great monsters of Doctor Who that I'd not seen. And I was also predisposed to like this because Patrick Troughton was by now, I think, my favourite Doctor, because I'd loved him in The Five Doctors, and because he was from the olden days. And I love the way that Colin Baker does this food stuff. The way he describes cooking the Gumball Jacks in their own juices is a beautiful piece of foodie acting. And it's clever because you're talking about because food is good if something is steeped in its own juices. It's a good way of flavouring something and using the most of the beast if you were. But it's also pretty grim if you boil it down to what it's sort of talking about. So I think that's very clever. It has that clever duality of what consuming a living creature is. I, for the record, am a non-meat eater, but I do eat fish. I wanted to give up fish when I was younger, and my mum wouldn't let me because I had to get some protein, and she was doing the cooking. And Colin Baker, I think, does the fish holding acting extremely well. There, I think you buy that is an actual moving fish. I even think you could sort of see it moving, but it's not. But I think he sells the illusion of that very well. I'm enjoying the Two Doctors. I hope you are. I know it divides people, but I was very, very happy to see Patrick Troughton back because he was my favorite. It didn't actually occur to me, the whole Time Lord thing, riding roughshod over what we knew of Doctor Who, but it now seems a very odd decision for a story that for a series that was so fastidious about throwbacks to the past. It then makes a major howler, and I know, you can now go, oh yeah, well, because he's got grey hair, it's season 6B, it's set after the War Games. Yeah, that sort of gymnastics. I'm not sure should be required if you're doing something that is just for people that don't go into it in that much detail, but remember the general sort of timelines of the show. I think these things shouldn't make, if you're looking back to the past, you shouldn't then make it more complicated and contradictory. Although I'm also sympathetic to Robert Holmes's thing of just going, I'll throw in whatever I want if it helps with the telling of the story. And I suppose you do need the Time Lords for this. So anyway, it is what it is. And it's season 6B. I as I say, I like this stuff between them. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that they start with the Second Doctor. It's quite brave to start without your leading man. And I do feel for Colin Baker because. Like in Revelation of the Daleks, where he arrives in the story an episode late, all the exciting things going on while he's walking towards the venue of the story. This is very much at the moment a Second Doctor story. Why do I keep saying Seventh Doctor when I mean second? Diplomatic. Patrick and Fraser Hines have a great report. Fraser Hines. There aren't many actors that you could cast 20 years after they've done it and them still, pass for the same age. I mean, Troughton's hair has gone grey, but Fraser Hines still has the youthful look. I love the economy of this. Nowadays you'd see the whole invasion force and all that sort of thing. This, we've got some excellent music. We've got an extra. He's called Fernand Monast. I think he's also one of the dancers in Black Orchid. Come in and say, Professor, and get shot. Bit of music. You see the hand and the weapon. You see Jamie. I think Runoff is quite generous. He sort of ambles off. But I love that whole sequence. I love the face-off between the Doctor and Dastari. I do get the impression of old friends. I do get the impression that the Doctor's wayward way of behaving is slightly at odds with the dignity of the scientist, and the scientist who also is quite affronted by the Time Lords. I buy that whole relationship, and I think they do it very well. But I love that. I love the Sontaran theme. I love I don't know, there's something, I love an extra running off on and saying something and a laser gun killing him, because it's all sort of, it's a confluence of the things you had at your disposal. Nowadays you can have laser beams flying around all over the place, but that was an effect that took some putting on, and so you didn't see many of them. So it was exciting just to see a laser beam. It was exciting to see glimpses of a Sontaran, because, as I say, I'd not seen them up to this point. I'm thrilled by the whole invasion of the spaceship bit. It's exciting. But it is worth examining why, because something is old. This is old enough where the hero can have a knife, because you wouldn't do that nowadays. It's interesting, isn't it, how knives were seen as fairly low key forms of violence. You you could stab somebody, throw a knife in somebody's back, and that was less visceral somehow than shooting somebody, because people had knives, and now you go, not a chance, because knives are imitatable and actually terrifying. God, knife crime is so such a blight to our streets, and yet it was, people messed about with knives. I mean, my brother, we'd got a few knives lying around because my dad had picked them up on his travels, so old army knives and things like that. And my brothers used to play a game where they stood on the lawn and threw the knife at each other's foot. I'm not sure this was a game sanctioned by my parents, but we lived out in the countryside. You were sort of left to your own devices. And yeah, they played a game where and one of my brothers did actually spear the other brother in the foot. But that was just seen as sort of childhood hijinks. But this is a fairly gruesome story. But yes, we're the idea of the past. I was so beguiled by the past because at this point I had no access to videos of old stories. Your purity could well become insufferable. I think that's an excellent line, and it's one I want to sometimes say to people who preach on Twitter. Jacqueline Pearce was a replacement for Elizabeth Spriggs, who plays Tilda Tabby in Paradise Towers, who was an estimable actress, a fine Shakespearean actress, but I can't imagine her as Jacini at all. She's a fine actress. She would have been a very different Jacini. But I think what Jacqueline Pearce has, she has that sort of forlorn sexual longing that she, I certainly buy her as because the androgyms are creatures of, visceral instinct and satisfying of sort of lusty pleasures, but she's been augmented beyond that. But that underlying sort of animal sort of magnetism, that she has a sort of longing about her that's quite sort of forlorn and melancholy, that I think really works. And there is a bit, I think I wasn't over the moon about her being in this simply because she reminded me of Servalan, and I'd seen load of Blake Seven, so I didn't need Doctor Who to have Blake Seven in it for it to be special or to impress my mates or whatever. I was so conscious of impressing my friends, but actually I think she's terrific in this, and I think she's terrific in Blake Seven. She has a wonderful sensuality about her, and I'm desperately trying to imagine Elizabeth Spriggs playing the part, and I'm not sure I can. Would have been very, very different. And I believe that Jacqueline Pearce was going to be saddled with Elizabeth Spriggs's wig, but then that got lost on the way to Spain, so then she was allowed different hair. So that was a happy accident for her, unless she actually found it I think it was lost on the flight, but unless she hid it. The Doctor's still not really in the story. Oh, I suppose he is. I suppose at least they've got the psychic connection bit where he's felt. Anyway, I'm trying to talk about the past. For me, anything that had a connection with old Doctor Who was somehow better, because that was a golden age. And I think it's just because it wasn't reachable. And I felt that anything that might, as I say, if I thought that this had 2 seconds of an actual Troughton story in it, that would automatically have made it. I remember the reason I liked Earthshock was because it had clips from 3 old stories in it. Actually, Earthshock on its own is an absolutely splendid story, and it's nothing to do with that flashback sequence. But when I was making lists in my head as a kid, Earthshock was the best of that season because it had got bits from old Doctor Who in it. What a self-loathing! The stuff that's present to me can't be as good as the stuff that was around before I was born. What a self-loathing way of behaving towards the show, and that was pretty much how I behaved towards the show throughout my lifetime with it, watching it and enjoying it, but always with an aching sense that I'd somehow missed out on what had gone before. It shows that looking back can sometimes be, well, it is, isn't it? It's very dangerous. All those people who sort of look back at the past as a sort of golden age and reject anything from the present are largely very unhappy people, and also wrong. There never was a golden age, Mike. I'm glad I've learnt that lesson now. The lighting here is lovely. I think this is this is effective. This dead space station stuff. I think that scene with Jamie and Shockeye could have done with that corridor maybe being a bit scored with laser blasts or something, because it did look like it was sort of almost separate from the ransacked space station, which really needed to look like it had been absolutely knackered. There should have been perhaps a fire if you did that now, you'd have hanging cables, you'd have exposed flames and all of that sort of thing. It just looked like it was slightly separate. We'll never quite get to the bottom of why Jamie turns into a growling beast. I don't know what that says about. That's a comment on Dear Fraser Hines. So if we leave you alone for more than a couple of weeks, mate, you're going to go feral. See, you need. Yeah, this suggestion of all this, destruction, I think you sort of needed in that scene of Jamie in the corridor. But this is nice, exploring, after the battle. Ooh, bloodstained. Yeah, that's very grim. And I've got to, of course, think of what Matt's not a fan, you see, so I wonder if he'll identify different things, because I know he's had to watch this specially. So I doubt he went in with particular things. But he might be much more general than I would be inclined to be. He might just say Patrick Troughton, do you know what I mean? He might say something about Nicola Bryant, because Matt is many things, an intelligent, funny, charming man who's also quite unreconstructed. That's the end of episode 1. This, of course, is an old-fashioned 6-parter. It threatened the Time Lords. The computer voice is Lawrence Payne. I think if I'd been Nicholas Fawcett, I'd have been a bit upset that I wasn't chosen to do the computer voice, because obviously you're getting an actor that you're already paying for, that you don't have to credit for another part. And Lawrence Payne's already got plenty to do. Or Tim Rainham, who plays Val. But anyway, I think Lawrence Payne is an excellent computer voice, and you're getting more out of one of your star actors. But when another Doctor Who magazine I remember very well is the one that had the episode guide from this, and I was very cross with it because in the credits it had the Doctor, then Perry, and then Patrick Troughton got third billing. I was like, I hope he didn't get that in the episode. I hadn't remembered, of course, because I don't like the idea of a companion ever getting credited before the Doctor, or the idea that the second Doctor might be guest cast, but he wasn't. He gets second billing in this, and rightly so. But the episode guide in Doctor Who magazine broke the episodes up into... It showed what the episode endings were for, I think, the American market, or certainly some sections of the international market where they were still being broadcast as 25 minutes. So obviously these extra long episodes had episode endings imposed upon them. And the first one for the two Doctors is when the computer goes, "It threatened the Time Lords," which, although it's a sort of incidental part of this, it's a bluff that the Doctor... it is fed in order to distract from the nefarious plans of the actual enemies. It has a bit of Time Lord conspiracy theory as window dressing throughout the story, because Robert Holmes liked having a go at the Time Lords as well. I bet that's Matt's favourite bit, where the Doctor picks up Perry. It wouldn't surprise me. But so I think that's quite an effective episode ending. As we will discover, they might not all be quite so effective. Now, this was enough to get Peter Moffat lambasted by fandom, in that the Sontaran removing his mask is in long shot. It's not even in long shot. It sort of cuts away, and because he doesn't fully get his mask off in the long shot. And the idea that a good director always has the monster remove his mask in close up, which is of course so prescriptive that that doesn't have to be the only way that you do it. But it was enough to be a sort of byword for Peter Moffat is a bad director, because instead of showing off the really expensive fancy location, he should show off the monster mask, because that is what Doctor Who traditionally does. I don't think you necessarily have to, although I am surprised that we didn't get some form of establishment of the Sontaran close up at any point. But I don't think, when we first get to the Hacienda, that is the time to linger on Are they the worst Sontaran masks? I think they might be. I think the Sontarans are actually creatures that in classic Doctor Who started with their very, very best design and costume and gradually got worse. I don't know. I may reconsider, because I do recall Stike having quite mobile features, but certainly I think the collars on these ones are really duff, and I think Lynx is one of the best monster design and realizations in the Time Warrior in the whole of Who. But I remember finding them a bit clattery. I think those collars need to be secure, and they're not. But it's difficult because I haven't quite seen the Sontaran yet, because Peter Moffat was filming where the money had been spent, which was on the Hacienda. Do we care that it's set in Spain? I know it's a great thing for BBC productions, but I always think the BBC was always slightly more, because they'd always do. I remember Only Fools and Horses, didn't they go to Florida for a Christmas special? I think they were always slightly more impressed than I was as a viewer. But geography has never been my thing, so full disclosure. But it didn't bother me if it was set in Spain or if it was set in, West W1 or, Denham. Did that wasn't the lure for me at all. The lure for me was Sontarans and Patrick Troughton, but that's because I'm a nostalgist. Perhaps the past. That's my geography. Another country, i.e. the past. But perhaps for other people, I'd be interested to hear if the fact that it was in Spain actually made any difference to people watching at the time. But it didn't really particularly bother me. It didn't strike me as being a particularly different setting. Do you know what I mean? To anywhere else that had lots of film work. Just outside film work was enough to make some Doctor Who seem different. And I remember particularly Lanzarote. The fact that Lanzarote in Planet of Fire is Lanzarote and Sarn just seemed to me a bit too obvious. But anyway, we'll talk about that when we get to Planet of Fire. All this sort of stuff about the Time Lords being bad guys and the Doctor sort of believing it might be possible but hoping it isn't adds to sort of a nice layer of sort of conspiracy to it. And the idea that the Time Lords might be up to no good, I think is quite a nice cynical backdrop for Doctor Who. Robert Holmes is very good at sort of broadening things out so that they have repercussions to worlds that we don't see. And he's got and I love a lot of his dialogue, that he dispenses little bits of texture so very cleverly. I also think there's some dialogue in this some of the bantery dialogue I'm not wild about, but the sort of as the Calgesic worn off and all those and our races have grown tired and defeat our seed is thin. There's a lot of bits like that I like, and I'm sure you could augment an earwig to the point where it understood nuclear physics, but would still be a very stupid thing to do. He writes some nice stuff for Troughton. And Troughton does that stuff so well. It's that slight sense of desperation that he has about it, sort of childish desperation that he has, that is so good. But Colin Baker was very much my Doctor. Although I struggled with the present, I'd not liked Peter Davison, who I love now, one of my favourite Doctors. He wasn't Tom Baker, who had been my Doctor. So when Colin Baker came and wasn't Peter Davison, I was a great fan, and I liked his testiness, and I think he's got an edge to him as a Doctor, and I think. Obviously the work he's done for Big Finish is so good, because I actually liked the costume at the time. I'm now not such a fan. I think it smacks a little bit of desperation, and it looks like a costume. I think you could have the same. Well, because it's in such good nick as well. Because it's at a time when, it looks like a BBC Light Ent production in places. And when the Doctor is the one that's screaming Light Ent, I think you are in a bit of trouble. And that's just about the look and the pristine nature of that costume. If it had been perhaps a bit dirtied up and broken down, and sort of so melded into the background just a little bit. But as I say, I liked it at the time. Amy Delamain, she's very convincingly Spanish. She played old ladies all the time, didn't she? She was one of those people who played old ladies forever. She imagines her being born an old lady. Gosh, I bet she was. I'm sure she was probably born in the previous century, was she? Or maybe not. No, maybe not. But I think in the brief couple of lines she's got, I wonder if they consider Patsy Smart, the ghoul from Talons of Weng Chiang, for this part as well, because I suspect there was just a handful of old ladies who cat fought for the various old lady parts going. But I think you are English. Yeah, I like the way she does her brief little bit, and of course he has to kill her, and she has to die without making an old lady do a stunt fall, and I think that's done pretty well. I remember watching this with some friends. They went, "What? Was that you killed her like that?" She's like, "Well, you can't chuck her against a wall. She's an old lady." And I like the little bits of sort of butchery, paralysis stuff that Shockeye dispenses upon the animals, i.e., the humans. And I'm assuming they're gonna. Oh, they don't cut away for a while. But I like the whole thing of John Stratton's body language, the way he wipes his hand on his protruding stomach. Jay Andragum. No, Jay McGrath as Dead Andragum. Now I'm remembering this. Fernand Monast as scientist. Haven't looked any of this up. This is in my head. Dead Andragum on your. I think Jay McGrath was an extra in other stuff as well. But that's a few of the sort of walk-on actors were credited in that episode guide, and they have stayed in my head. I don't know much else about Jay McGrath, but I hope he was happy then, and if he's still alive now, he's happy now. Fernand Monast, I did have to look up something, because I think somebody was trying to identify some of the extras from Black Orchid, I think. And I think he was in an episode of Dempsey and Makepeace or something that I tracked down, and he'd got a couple of lines in that he gets a credit in. I think it might have been Dempsey and Makepeace, in order to help somebody identify him, and I can't remember why it was now, because this happens to me. I get messages from people going, "Do you know anything about these actors / extras?" Because I'm trying to identify who is who with something. I'm the unpaid actors advisor of the Doctor Who universe. And it distracts me from doing the sort of work I should do to earn a living, but I do quite like it when I get sent a challenge to go, "Do you know what happened to this guy?" And sometimes I know, and sometimes I've got a little bit of a head start, and sometimes I don't know, but have a bash, and quite enjoy it. I like the archaeology, but I particularly like finding out about the people, partially because I'm envious of anybody that's spent a time on set in an episode of Doctor Who. It's interesting because I do like the Spanish setting now. It does give it a different feel, and I think Peter Moffat gets a lot of stick, but I know he went ahead of schedule, and so some scenes that were originally set inside are set outside, and of course if they're set outside, the scenes do look so much better, and they get a little bit of an extra edge, and I like these two guys hanging around in Spain. I love these guest characters. And the Andragum's interesting though, and I wonder because Matt he alluded to the fact that he teaches people, doesn't he, about cultural differences and things like that. I wonder how he will take the idea that the Andragums are predisposed to only be creatures of lust and pleasure, and that the idea you might augment one with superior intelligence is a bad thing. How do we take that? Obviously, in a show like Doctor Who, having an alien race that has a particular quality is what defines them as an alien race. The Sontarans are warlike, and that helps to tell the story and perhaps satirize a particular element of humanity, because the aliens are a distillation of that particular thing you wish to examine about ourselves. But it does mean, therefore, that alien races aren't as diverse as, say, there are some warlike humans, but not all because they're from one country, for example. There are lustful humans, but not because they're all from one country. It's a trait that goes through a personality type rather than a racial or a species type. So I'm interested how we feel about. I don't mind, because I like the fact that the androgams are a vessel with which to examine the idea of gluttony, and to turn the tables on us and find us the foodstuff of desire, and for the way that Shokai talks about us as livestock, I think is a witty joke. Although this does have its livestock and eats it, in terms of it's a story about how disgusting gluttony is, that also is that also is pretty gruesome in its execution. Yes, it extols the virtues of vegetarianism whilst reveling in meaty murder. And I know a couple of very smart, clever writer people who think this is a terrible script, which is interesting, because I've always had a soft spot for. I've always liked it. I will, I'm not going to struggle to find things that I like about the Two Doctors, and yet I can completely understand anybody that has a problem with it. There's absolutely no need for all this guff with the Doctor and Perry in yet another variation of the ventilation stuff. We're waiting for the main characters to get involved in the story. As I've said, it is slightly hypocritical in that it's a call to arms for vegetarianism that revels in its own excesses, and it does have a few tonally questionable things that we will talk about when we get to them. I don't want to anticipate one. I'm in two minds about one of them. I'm in absolutely one condemnatory mind about the other. And yet, I find the action of this quite enjoyable. I find the grotesqueness of it quite enjoyable. I like the sort of black comedy of it, and actually, I found as a youth, because Doctor Who was starting to be seen as sort of a bit cheap and a bit quaint, when Doctor Who was to echo a phrase that was soon to be used about it by one of its bosses, violent and unimaginative, that the violence to me was grown up. Now that's interesting, isn't it? That violence was seen as grown up, but it combated the low budget for me. It combated the fact that you couldn't have stuff that you had in more adult things. So when it was sort of quite grim and people died, and particularly if they bled or exploded, that to me was, this was the stuff. I adore Oscar and Anita. I adore Anita. I mean, I would run away with Anita. I love her accent. Didn't she say of the Dona Joanna, she is old and has white hair? I think Carmen Gomez is very winning, and I love James Saxon, who was pretty much my age, I think, when he died, not long after the DVD of this came out. Now, this is a scene, the one between Shokai and Val, that was supposed to be done indoors. I love the way sort of he's almost got the shakes. Look at how he shakes with sort of sensual pleasure, but he's obviously riddled with all sorts of diseases. Shock-eye. And I love the way he sort of spits out the watermelon and calls it insipid filth. And watermelons are slightly disappointing and full of pips. They do have a beautiful underlying flavour. I don't think they're the best designed of things, but I love. I just adore what John Stratton does with Shock. I totally buy him as both a butcher, but as also as somebody who appreciates food, but also is a glutton with food. fancies himself as a gourmand, but is actually a pig. And I think that there is that's the fine line, isn't it, between somebody who appreciates food and somebody who's just greedy. And I think he captures all of that whilst being a sort of believable alien rogue. I'm enjoying John Stratton more and more as I talk about him. And I love James Saxon. That's what I think I wanted to, it only sort of slightly hit me that Oscar was as an actor. I was so young, bear in mind I was 10, 11 when this was on. So I probably noticed at the time, but then I sort of forgotten as it was broadcast and it became a memory. And when it came back again, it was clearer to me that that Oscar's an actor, and he is the sort of he's very much how actors are played on television by actors. Even though I'm not sure I know any actors that are totally like him, or do I? But I do adore Oscar because he allows Robert Holmes to give him some brilliant lines. And is that in this episode where have I just been talking through it, where he says, "Oh, I love these moths." She says, "Well, why do you kill them then?" Which I think but again, that captures that the contradiction between somebody who appreciates things but also destroys them and treats them very, very badly. And of course, he's really largely there to provide the means for one of the questionable things that happens later. But I'm not going to get ahead of myself now. As we're getting to the end of this episode, where this is Jamie's house, yeah, Fraser, this is what you'll do when you when you've just been left with nobody to talk to. You'll somehow throw away your kilt and dress as a garage mechanic who starts dribbling and forgets how to talk. And of course Perry gets ravished, and Colin always does that sort of getting knocked unconscious sort of acting and all the sort of sci-fi stuff. He always does that very well. And Fraser's wrapping himself around Nicola Bryant there. So that's the end of episode 1 of The Two Doctors. I love that. I mean, I don't think it treats. Amy Delamain gets 4th. That's very interesting. Because that's the only place she'll fit because of the other pairings. Yeah. It struggles again to fit the Doctor and Perry in. They are sort of slowly getting to the story. John Walker, excellent film cameraman. He had a good time with Doctor Who because he was the film cameraman on City of Death as well, and he was a film camera assistant on Abominable Snowmen. So he got to go to all the foreign locations: Spain, France, and Wales. Tony Burrow. His brother was an actor called John Darrell, who I worked with. But Tony Burrow is an Oscar-nominated designer. Designed quite a lot of sets, Doctor, in the 80s, and is interviewed in the... I'm just going to pause that. Interviewed in the 20th anniversary Radio Times special, but has not contributed to the DVD or Blu-ray range, which I think is something it would be nice to readdress, because he got an Oscar nomination for Ian McKellen's Richard III, and a very good set designer. Anyway, this is all the sort of stuff to be saying when the episode is on. Now, I think I told Matt to choose 2 things about each episode, and then a bonus at the end. So I've got to choose 2 favourite things about episode 1 of The Two Doctors. Well, the first, I think he's not going to choose this. I'm sure he's going to say something about, he's going to like Perry's top or something. He's going to try and rile me with something unreconstructed, Matt. I may be doing him a disservice, and he may come across as an absolute gentleman, but scratch the surface. I Sontaran attack. I like, and I think if he does any of these things, I'll take it. I like that sequence from the technician getting zapped, the economy of that, the scientist rushing in, and the zap of the laser beam, but particularly, I think that that Sontaran theme, dum 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 dum. Dum dum, which is militaristic, but it's also dramatic. I just like that. I like the attack on the base, which, and again, with a modern day Doctor Who budget, you'd have loads of explosions. You'd have the ships coming in a big old model shot, and you'd have various people getting slain, and probably more aliens and all that sort of thing. But it's told with great economy. It's done under. It's done how you did Doctor Who then, and I still think it's really dramatic and exciting. Although I think Fraser should run slightly faster. That's all. That's because you could say sort of go, I can't run too fast because the set's going to come to an end. And I think I've got to choose. And I don't think coming into this I was going to choose this, but maybe not at this stage. But I think John Stratton is so good, so the whole sort of concept of the androgams, and as their sole representative, because Jacqueline Pearce is technologically augmented, and I just think the way that he plays it as a sort of slightly sort of scabrous pirate. It's like he's got, it's like he's sort of got scurvy, and he's that sort of slight shake that he has, and the way that he uses his hands. And I even like the way he sort of flourishes his knife when they go into the kitchen, and the roars that he gives. I think John Stratton is glorious, and I think all of the cast are glorious. And I know I have to avoid the temptation of just picking out the guest cast because I know things about them and blah, 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 blah. But I think everything that John Stratton embodies Shockeye, in terms of how important it is to the story because of what the androgams are. I think he nails them as a species and as their sole sort of full representative. I think he does sterling work, and it's a glorious performance of the type you can only get in Doctor Who. So I do like the face-off between Troughton and Lawrence Payne as well, Dastari. I do like that back and forth that they have. But I'll go for Sontaran Attack. It's like incidental music, all of that, and John Stratton as Shockeye as my two favourite things of episode 1. What has my dear friend Matt Hayden chosen?
So I hope you enjoyed episode 1. Oh goodness, it's getting warm in here. I think someone must be putting the heating up. It really is getting warm. I won't go as far as I hoped Perry would go when I was 19. In episode 1, so many things to pick from, but I particularly like the fact that they dive straight in with the second Doctor. No explanation, just go straight in with him. I do wonder whether that might have been some confusing for some younger viewers, but I love the boldness of just going with that. And the other choice was, I love actors doing a bit of business, and I love Colin Baker's business with the Gumblejack. Although, is that a Gumblejack? I'm not quite clear. I think he's failed to catch a Gumblejack, hasn't he? But you can tell me that. And Jamie's nifty little act with his scheme-do. I think actors enjoy doing a bit of business, and those two chaps do a terrific job. So those are my two choices for episode 1 of The Two Doctors.
I like that. Now he called James. Was that James Knight? Because I know that as a Dirk, which is in his. It's in his sock, isn't it? And I'm sure it's in the novelisation of Tomb of the Cybermen or one of those that I was very impressed that Jamie had a knife sequestered about his person because he could wield that in times of peril. I like the idea that the companion could act of his own accord. He called it a scheme-do, did he, Matt? I'm going to look that up later. I'll learn something. I picked I enjoyed Colin's business with the fish, and I do think you're right. I think it's not a gumblejack, as he was aiming for a gumblejack, or maybe it's a small gumblejack. But I thought that was nifty, and I had I thought about it, I might have chosen with going for opening with Troughton, but I felt that was perhaps me of the past, because yes, of course you open with the old stuff, the old people, because they're the best. But actually, I love Colin Baker as well. So I think perhaps the older Wisebeaker as well. I actually think it's probably it's at the incumbent Doctor's expense, and I'm not sure if that's wise. Interestingly, in retrospect, I wonder if actually the current Doctor should take the lead. Especially in a season where there are other stories where he is ill served. So maybe that prevented me from choosing the fact that it opens and the first 10 minutes are with the old Doctor, who I absolutely adore and can't get enough of, and I love all those scenes with him and his rapport with Jamie, which has picked up where they left off. I love those two together. So perhaps that's what stopped me choosing it, but I'm certainly happy as a viewer without these mental gymnastics that we do to go to watch it and enjoy. I love the first 15 minutes of the story that are Troughton and Jamie on colour adventures together. So yeah, good choices both, but neither of them. Both things I highlighted, but neither things I actually chose. Although I will get points if Matt chooses the Sontaran theme and or Shock Eye for later episodes, because that's how it works, I think. Yeah. So anyway, thanks to Matt. Thanks to you for listening. I'm gonna turn off all the lights and activate the security system that for some reason is in my ventilation shaft, should anybody be crawling about in there, or in fact any of my friends that I haven't spoken to for a couple of weeks have gone feral and turned into savage ventilation shaft dwelling beasts. Well, hello everybody. I hope you're hungry for more delights from the Doctor Who story, The Two Doctors. We have on the menu the thoughts of my good friend Matt Hayden, who isn't known to Doctor Who fandom. He's just a chum of mine. Nothing just about that. And also one of those delightful people you meet in life who Matt is very knowledgeable about a lot of things. So even though he's not a Doctor Who fan, he could still name doctors and stories. And, he's the sort of guy that can spot Ronald Rad from 20 paces without, as I say, considering himself an expert, because he also knows about... Well, no, he's a movie buff. Sure, he's a movie buff. So, but he knows about lots of other things as well. But yeah, he knows enough about Doctor Who without ever feeling the need to buy a DVD or anything. So he said he fancied doing The Two Doctors, which I'm very happy about, because there's not enough Colin Baker love in Happy Times and Places at the moment. I've had a few more. A lot of them have been claimed now. It took a while, but actually nobody else has recorded their thoughts, bar Emma Reeves, who did Time Lash really early on in the process, and now Matt with The Two Doctors. So let's see what is in store with episode 2. So you see, I've just turned up the... I love this music, and that the music is on the DVD menu. But I'm going to have to go to episode selection, because we're for episode 2, or part 2, to give it its correct nomenclature. And I'm going to press select in 3, 2, 1, go. Worked first time. But of course there's a pause. So as the Starfield kicks in... well, thanks for listening to this. I like The Two Doctors. I think I was always going to be predisposed to like it. I'm sure I mentioned in the last episode, which I recorded a while ago. Sorry, there's been a gap between recordings. Probably a longer gap between recordings than between you listening, because you get one a week. But I was predisposed to like this because it had old stuff in it. I'm curious about the past. I listened to a Fleetwood Mac song that just came on the radio the other day, and it reminded me, it was one of the few tapes I had. My friend Duncan did it for me on cassette. And it reminded me of my teenage years, which weren't necessarily particularly happy because they were full of all those teenage worries, and I wasn't terribly happy at home, but I had Doctor Who as an island. But I think I did feel a sort of thrill of potential as though, because there's something very alive about being a teenager, and that, you know, crossing over into the threshold of being an adult when you can decide the things that you want to do, and you suddenly don't have to do as you're told all of the time, and the feel that one was on the cusp of that whilst still living at home. I remember being very exciting. But how old was I when? And listening to that piece of music, I suddenly got very emotional. I got very teary. The past is a curious place where it's a sort of safe refuge because we know we got through it, but also we miss it because it's gone. And I think I look back now and wish I'd tried to be happier, because actually, you know, adulthood is not just about doing what you want. There's so many other different pressures that you have to bear, and actually you're never freer than when you're a teenager, free of responsibilities. And I wish I didn't perhaps enjoy. I did enjoy my teenage years. Well, it was a mixture of joy and angst, which is very much what watching Doctor Who was like during this period. I loved Doctor Who, but was also very aware that it wasn't as good as it used to be. Whereas, of course, now I view this era the same as any other. There are highs and lows. There are bits I like about each story and bits I don't. One of the things that I've not quite got to grips with is why Jamie has dressed as a garage mechanic and turned into whatever he was trying to do to Perry there. It's amazing how sort of casually abusing young women. Well, certainly poor old Perry, she goes through it, is sort of thrown around as random jeopardy in this, but it was pretty good. I remember my sister sort of, I think looking slightly askance at the way that we didn't know it was Jamie at the time, but the feral creature wrapped its leg around Perry in a certain way. I always thought these things were good. The way that, again, Matt mentioned Colin's sort of grappling with the Gumblejack and convincing you that it was life. The way he applied those things, which I assume are a reverse needle. It's an old trick. The needle goes back into the shaft, but the way they stick to his neck and the needle goes in, they looked real to me, and I even though I knew that they couldn't be, it's just a nice little touch when Doctor Who pays attention to the little details. I remember Russell T Davies on the commentary of Army of Ghosts talking about not being happy with a particular button, and they had to on the ghosty machine thing that the Doctor made, that they actually went back and did little reshoots for the close-ups of the buttons, and that sort of attention to detail is breathtakingly impressive and indicative of his grasp of how the show works and how the show sometimes it exists in the minutiae, and you carry off a little moment like that, and you just help to sell the dream, and you foul up a little moment like that, and it can make the cynics or the suspension of disbelief more difficult. It can harm the cynics, those predisposed to not like this stuff. But I nonetheless I do feel that Jamie is perhaps a trifle more sophisticated this time on the TARDIS than to turn into whatever it is he turns into for the sake of the cliffhanger, because there's no other explanation other than he's been left alone for a bit on a space station, so he gets changed, and as I say, the first thing he thinks to do is try to molest the first person that comes along, who typically, of course, is Perry, for whom seemingly molestation was part of the job description when she signed up for companion college. Anyway, mixed a metaphor then, really. Going to college isn't a job, is it? So, well, look, this is all off the top of my head. I'm so sorry. And I have to say that I think the story is sort of at its least interesting in these in these, well, they're not ventilation shafts, are they? They're massive, whatever they are, this infrastructure. But I remember not minding at the time, because just Jamie being there was exciting enough. He was a link to the past, and I remember feeling so lucky that we got Fraser Hines, because he's only in the Five Doctors for a moment, and it was like, oh well, now they've got him, and I have to say, Fraser throws himself into any Doctor Who event with gusto, and I think there's lots of lovely little moments he has in this story. And look at that, it's coming out again. I think that is a lovely, and it pulls at his skin. I think those little sticky injection things are absolutely fabulous. They might actually go on my list of things that are the best things about the story. And that's not because I'm damning with faint praise, because there's lots I like about this. She looks like she's wearing psychedelic tinfoil, does poor old Perry. It's a good job they're not going somewhere really hot where she can bake. Oscar and Anita. I do like Oscar and James Saxon. I don't think there are enough out-of-work actors in Doctor Who. Well, there's lots of out-of-work actors in Doctor Who, but obviously they're not out of work when they're in Doctor Who. But I think I mentioned last time, Oscar is like you hope actors are, but actually most actors aren't. I used to think that the profession was, had it's always described as people being, having particular propensity for squabbling or vanity and all of the and backstabbing and all of those things. And it's it's only when my mum came home from working in a staff room, or my sister worked for a charity, and you actually discover those sorts of characters are in every single workplace. It's just that people are interested in what actors do, so they hear about it more. So I think actors get an unfairly bad reputation. I like the company of actors. It's one of the things that made me want to be an actor, not so much the work as the company, whiling away the hours, drinking and smoking, neither of things I'm allowed to do anymore. And of course, you actually realise that, as I say, that actors are no different to anybody else. Perhaps they just know a few more stories about backstage shenanigans or programs that you like, so that's why I like them, because I like what they're talking about. But I thought it was a really curious thing, that sort of happy, sad, melancholy, nostalgia frisson that I got from a song that reminded me of and I could feel the warmth. We had a kitchen with an Aga, so I stayed in the kitchen because that was the warmest part of this old cold house we lived in, and I can the cassette tape on the tape deck that I had that had been my birthday present, and I haven't listened to that music for ages. And I suppose I don't get it quite the same with Doctor Who, because watching this now, all I can remember watching my bootleg VHS, because I took all my videos with me to university. I had a trunk with all my Doctor Who's on, so I kept watching this. I don't necessarily associate this with a particular time when it was first on, although I can, as I say, I can remember watching it in the sitting room at my house when I was a kid. And actually my mum broke a cardinal rule. I was always allowed to watch Doctor Who. That was sort of taken as read. Doctor Who was my thing. But she must have been in a bad mood with me or something, because I think it might have been this episode. It's when Patrick Troughton's being interrogated by Stike. I think she came in and told me I had to move my shoes from the hall, and it was like, well, can I not just wait till Doctor Who's finished? No, you have to do it now. So I actually missed a tiny bit of the episode because I had to do a thing that she was annoyed about. And I remember thinking that was unusual, because actually watching Doctor Who was the one thing that I was sort of allowed to do. This is Colin has a speech. I think they should have given Colin a few more speeches. He's very good at this. Whimsical's wrong. Melancholy, whimsicoly. sort of monologues that he does very well. And he's very good at the action too, and keeping the pacing up and the sort of peeved panic that he does. Now he's seeing everybody. It's a trap. It's not true. All the deaths were faked. But that's quite a nice little. Plot sleight of hand, or that gives the Doctor the clue to the next bit. No, he's not Jamie McCrimmon. Yes, he is. Lovely. And I like the fact, because I'm sure Colin and Fraser get on because they're I would say they're actors cut from a similar cloth, and so I think they bounce off each other rather nicely, which I like, because I like the idea that a modern Doctor likes an old companion, and that affection still lingers in future generations. I think that's very important. I remember getting very cross with Peter Davison at the end of the Five Doctors, saying, "I'm certainly not the man I was, thank goodness," going, "How dare you? How dare you be rude about the past?" The past is so... I got a message from a Doctor Who fan, a young Doctor Who fan, I talked to on Facebook, who's been to see my show and things. And he was talking about he still holds sort of upset at the people who bullied him in the past for liking Doctor Who, because it's an easy target, isn't it? Especially when nobody's watching it. A plot. Well done, Fraser. That's very funny. I love the little touches that Fraser Hines gives to Jamie, sort of going, he's a bit thick, but it's delightful, and he judges it perfectly. I think it's pitched perfectly. And this young friend of mine is still so upset about the injustice of people using his Doctor Who fandom to bully him. And I see people online sort of bullying people or being mean about people for the way that they like Doctor Who, whether it's a modern fan who gets a bit carried away about the particular things that have upset them, which modern fans seem to do, and that's fine. I think being sensitive, there's nothing wrong with being sensitive, and I think it all comes from. I think it slightly overcompensates, but it all comes from a desire for the world to be a better place. But my main sort of thing is, why do you care what anybody thinks about what you think about Doctor Who? And for my young friend, it was because he was still sort of holding on to what people did in the past and the injustice. Well, the injustice only exists if you give it power, and those people that were bullying him have probably forgotten. So the past... So it's interesting because Patrick Troughton, here he is, was in it, was somehow a better version of one Doctor Who because it had got an old thing in it. Well, that's fruitless as well, to try and recapture the past and say, well, if only we could get back to there. And it blinded me to what was great about this. Oh man, I still liked Colin Baker, but this was somehow given more gloss because it was from the old days, which I hadn't seen, so I didn't even know that they were better, but because I couldn't see them, and because they weren't associated with me and my time, and that's dangerous folly. But we do that, don't we? We look back to a golden age politically, anything, and I think that's very, very foolish, and also bad things from the past are only given power if you let them affect you, and certainly what other people think of Doctor Who, I don't care. No offence, but I don't care what you think about Doctor Who. We can have a lovely chat about it, of course, but I don't. I'm perfectly secure in my love for Doctor Who and what I love about it. It's fine. And the things I don't love about it, I don't mind, because they're part of a greater whole. Do like this music. I don't think I can vote for the music because I think that was all part of the package of what I liked about the last one. I don't, however, like the Sontaran costumes. Links had tight-fitting leather. Look at this. I mean, I know it's not Tinsley, but it looks like it's not shiny in the way that leather is shiny, like Lynx's leather is shiny. It's slightly more showbiz shiny. It's slightly more like it could be on the catwalk with in a light end show with Colin Baker's costume. I'm glad. I'm almost glad the Sontarans never appeared in Doctor Who again in the classic series, because they get gradually worse as they appear, and taller. Clinton Grain's about to come as Stike, and he's a giant, nasty, brutish, and short. They're supposed to be, and I think they recapture the shortness in the modern series very well. So presumably, if they'd appeared again, they'd have had even worse masks, really, really rattly neck armour. And they'd be played by Andre the Giant and Jacob Rees-Mogg. He would. Oh God. He'd be very good as one of the gentlemen in Buffy, wouldn't he? I do like these characters. I think the dynamic between Dastari, the scientist, Jacqueline Pearce, who I sort of took for granted because she was Servalan, and it's only sort of considering her and watching her performance now. And I think the last time I watched it, I remember going, "Oh, she's actually really good." And if you take away from the fact that she's Servalan, so this performance was quite familiar to me because of her vocal patterns and her poise and that sort of that longing, that forlorn, sensual longing that she puts into everything. You sort of go, "Oh, well, I've seen this because I've seen Servalan," but actually within the confines of this being in a Doctor Who, I think she gives an excellent performance. John Stratton, good for you, go with gusto, chewing, I think, damsons out of the neck of a rat. And I love the way he does the sort of, he really is. And there's the slight limp that he's got, and he's just a horrible thing, isn't he? But I buy him to in the way that he's sort of caressing the body and can you see the lump in his chest there? That's his. I think that's his. Is it Benson Hedges or Marlborough? I can't remember what he spoke, but that's his fags and his lighter that he would never have too far. Yeah, I love the way he spits that. But yeah, he was a chain smoker, I believe. I mean, God, he was only 65 when he died. That's, but yeah, he wouldn't be too far away from his cigarettes. So that's what he's got stuffed down the front of his shirt. I love him. I wrote to him, but I wrote to him care of his agent, and I don't know if it was ever passed on. But I never heard back because, yes, he was Captain Potter in Quatermass in the Pit, the romantic lead. The young hero, and here he is as a... so what, Quatermass of the Pit was 58, 59, 69, 79. So it's 25, 26 years later. But it seemed like, I mean, the gulf between those two things seemed extraordinary. Quatermass of the Pit was the hallowed days of black and white, unreachable, fusty, ancient, and this was, modern, colourful Doctor Who. This is probably 85, 95, 2005. This is further away now than Quatermass in the Pit was when this was on. Oh my goodness, that makes me feel ancient. This can't be as old as Quatermass in the Pit. Oh God. I mean, it was honestly like another world that was only inhabited by ghosts. And it was really weird because my assumption when I was writing to Quatermass people that was most people were dead because the leads were and everything like that. So you assumed, and John Stratton was one of the few alive. Actually, at the time I was writing to people in the late 80s, loads of people were still alive from Quatermass of the Pit, and I now wish I'd written to all of them. I've had the pleasure of encountering a few antediluvian fogey. That's a nice line. Antediluvian is good, but I don't like this bit at all. Sorry. If anything happens to myself, I do wish you'd stop mixing personal pronouns, says Perry, as if that's something he's been doing all of the time. It's a really bad sort of sitcom line that Nicola Bryant does her best with, but it's I would have I'd have lost that in the edit myself. The actors do their best, but it's not a good piece of writing. So I know I'm supposed to accentuate the positive, and I do like the majority of this, but I don't like that bit. One of the Animode group, yes, I like the way that Patrick Troughton does that. It's just recovering, and Lawrence Payne has such dignity, doesn't he? And here we have what's John Stratton eating now? Oh, he's got a big bone. He's having a whale of a time, and I adore him. I wish I'd had the pleasure. I asked Colin about him, and Colin said that he was a nice man who was really happy to be in Doctor Who, so that's nice. And Colin Baker was a big fan of Quatermass in the Pit when he was a kid. This is Clinton Grain as Field Major Stike, Field Marshal Stike, who I think is excellent. Now, I used to hate the mouths. There's a poster of Stike in one of the Doctor Who magazines, and it seemed to me to emphasise how he's slightly lopsided and now his mouth is a inflexible thing. But actually, again, the last time I watched this, even though the lips don't move in the way that Kevin Lindsay's lips move so brilliantly as Link's, and it seems to be part of the same face, I actually think the lips aren't bad, even though the lips of the mask don't move at all, and it's the made-up lips underneath. I had been expecting to not think they were any good, but actually it's a good melding, and I think you get a great performance from Clinton Grain's eyes, but I do think the mask isn't as flexible or as good or as organic as that original Link's. Now, I know I'm comparing it to one of the best Doctor Who mask/makeup/costumes ever, which I think Link's is, but it does seem a bit mad that these things went downhill, 13 years later they can't do it as well as they once did, and it's just the loose fitting of the costume. That again, that Link's is so compact, and so he looks like a military unit. The fact that the costume is a bit rumpled, it just seems wrong. I find it amusing now that every monster costume has to be this sort of ribbed latex, where you can, the costume itself has ribs, and they're of a particular type, which I'm sure will date in 20 years' time. But at least they fit. Do you know what I mean? At least they, and I think in clinging and being tight, they compact. They do the job they are supposed to be doing. Oh, and isn't this one of the false cliffhangers? Does he say, surely you are joshing us, officer, as well? I like joshing. No, I've got a feeling this is the cliffhanger when she says, of course, this way. I think that's the false cliffhanger in the American version when they split the episode in half. I'm sure in Doctor Who magazine it says, yes, the Doctor asks if they could show them, and Anita says, yes, it's this way. And you go, that's because it's 25 minutes in, or whatever, 22 and a half minutes in. Oh, I bet you were glued to your seats, America. Shepton Mallet throughout the war. Mandan gun, was it? No. Oh no, it was Sylvia Coleridge, wasn't it? It was Amelia Ducas manned an Akak gun at Folkestone. But yes, Shepton Mallet. It's just the sound. Shepton Mallet sounds so sort of beautifully parochial. It is sometimes giving a British place name can have a certain sort of tawdry charm. Shepton Mallet. I've never been no apologist to anybody from Shepton Mallet, but there's a brilliant bit in The Office where Ricky Gervais's David Brent is talking about places, and and that's said in Slough, which in itself has an onomatopoeic sort of dowdiness about it. But he talks about Winnersh. Winner's the way that he pronounces it as well. It's great how just a place name with a certain emphasis can be so funny and evocative. And actually, of course, The Meaning of Lift, Douglas Adam and John Lloyd's book, where they take place names and ascribe meanings for things that we don't have words for, is a genius idea, and I think one of the best books ever read, and very, very funny. If you've never read The Meaning of Liff, it's got a Doctor Who link because it's Douglas Adams. You will not go wrong enjoying that. I like this. Patrick Troughton does so well. He spends the whole episode tied up. Troughton's very good at being truthful and funny, but he's driving the drama as well, all whilst tied up or strapped down. And he's very Simon Cowell in the trouser department, isn't he? They're going right up to his midriff. I do like Robert Holmes's dialogue. Although, as I say, I can sort of understand people that have problems with this paean to vegetarianism, which also indulges in the most grotesque imagery and dialogue and incidents that it possibly can. And I'm troubled by Dastari. I think Lawrence Payne does it very well, but he's a sort of conscience-stricken scientist. Unless he wants to, it'll hurt me more than it hurts you. What gives you that idea? So unless he wants to give a witty response, oh crumbs. I like oh crumbs. I think that might have been the bit that I missed, because did my sister tell me he said oh crumbs, and I was sad to have missed it. Anyway, so I missed a little bit of this until I could see it many years later, because I'd left my shoes in the hall. God, it's horrible being a kid, isn't it? How old was I when this was on? 11. Oh. And I was only at home one day. I was only at home for Saturday nights. So it was my island. And I thought maybe I deserved a break to just be allowed to be me. Anyway. Oh, the past. It's another country. I know they say that, but it's another country with lots of ditches and lots of terrifying encounters, lots of bits you never understand. Anyway, I'm obsessed with the power of the past, but it's a power that we give it, isn't it? And yet, I find solace in this stuff as well, because it anchors us. I love the fact that this still exists from my childhood, and it's a reminder of this was the thing that I look forward to. This was the highlight of my week. I was bereft when Doctor Who wasn't on. I was excited about Doctor Who when it was coming on, and I still have that as an adult, looking forward to Doctor Who when it's on. But and the fact that it was new Doctor Who, and it was we knew nothing. I mean, as I said, I'd had the little preview in Doctor Who magazine telling us that it was going to be 3 episodes, but that was it. I didn't even know the Sontarans were going to be in it. Well done, Clinton Grain. You're scratching your face. It's a little actor's trick there for somebody working inside a mask that goes, well, a lesser actor would not think to do that because he's in a mask. He's going, no, this isn't a mask. This is my face, even though it's got kinks in places and it sort of looks like somebody's sucked the air out from underneath, so it sort of started. The cheek bits. But he's an impressive size, Clinton Gray. He's very tall. He was a very magnificent fellow. He was a wonderful architect. I went to his flat, which he'd done himself, and it had gorgeous sort of limestone interiors on the or sandstone on the way up the stairs, which was sort of stone stairs in London. And then this gorgeous flat which had loads of sort of glass and white surfaces, and he had a very beautiful wife. And they were just classy people. Gave me a lovely cup of coffee. In his, I like the way he slaps him here. It really works. But he's trying to trick the Sontaran. It's great, and I love the idea of this diminutive pixie-like Doctor challenging this tall, imposing, as he sees, an honourable soldier, field marshal type. You can see a bit of hair sticking up there, but I don't think you see enough of their beards. And actually, I find the beard of Link's much better because it's like a wiry, sharp thing, whereas that seems sort of wispy hair. Great eye acting, brilliant eye acting here from Clinton Grain. He really bursts out of I like the eyebrows, but the beard, you don't really get enough of it. But as I say, I like the really sharp spikes that Lynx has as a beard. But that's all the Doctor trying to do. Well, he doesn't know if it will work, even if it does work, which it doesn't. But in challenging to a duel, that would at least get him free from his bonds, and then he could come up with another plan. I like that. That's the Doctor, pitching in to do a plan that he doesn't know what the end game of the plan is, but at least it will get him beyond where he is now. And I just love the idea of the little doctor going, I'm challenging you to a duel, which is a ridiculous thing to do, but sensible under the circumstances, but a lovely juxtaposition between those two characters. But yeah, Clinton Grain, I thought was a man of great style. And he was tall and white-haired and very strong. And he died quite suddenly because I know he was going to do a signing for Phantom, and season 18 box set was coming out, and Jane, his wife, had to phone them and say, "Oh, sorry, he's died." So must have been very sudden, and I liked him. And yeah, I think he was a member of the Society for Architects, and I can see why, because he'd lived next door, I think, and then he'd bought the flat next door that there'd been something about it hadn't been able to buy. It was being eyed for redevelopment or something, and he finally got his hands on it, and as I say, did this beautiful job on it. Beautiful place. So what do we think of them being in Spain? I think it does give it a nice different hue. As I say, it wasn't great, massive news to me, but I'm not greatly geographical. But it does make a change from a gravel pit, I suppose. But also, I suppose it's slightly tainted because you know that John Nathan Turner was probably enjoying a jolly. And then there is something fun, isn't there, about two extravagant extraterrestrials sitting in a kitchen going through recipe books. And I do actually like, the idea that we suddenly become the prey, we become the food stuff, because that does shine a light on the way that we treat animals. That's because all we are is animals with ideas above our station. So suddenly, if we are game, as it were, or even worse, we're livestock. At least game lives in the wild. But if we're livestock for these alien creatures, this is a nice touch, I think. Does she put this in his mouth? Now, I'd always thought it was a fruity thing or a plum or something, but it's not. It's a piece of beetroot, isn't it? Which is different because he's actually eating it. He's giving the impression he's eating a lovely piece of fruit, but of course beetroot would take completely different. I love you, John Stratton. I've always liked his performance. I'm enjoying it even more now than I ever have before. This is the great thing about coming back to Doctor Who bit. Suddenly, you'll be watching it and you go, "Oh, that bit. I'm watching it for this bit now." And sometimes I've watched Who's and things I've really liked haven't quite worked for me that time round. And then I've gone, "Oh, I thought that person was better. I thought that monster was better, or that shit was better." And then the next time I watch it, I'll go, "Oh yeah, I remember when I last watched this. I didn't like that performance as much. Oh no, actually, it's a really good performance." And I think I was a bit like that with the Sontaran masks, going, "Oh, I'm expecting not to like them, but actually, Clinton Grain's mask it works." I still maintain that they're not as good as previous. Well, the Invasion of Time ones, but I mean, he doesn't even have the same mask. Well, the same makeup between studios, but we'll do that when we do the Invasion of Time. And the Sontaran Experiment one had to be slightly compromised because Kevin Lindsay had been poorly, and it's still a decent mask, and it ties in with the Gollum idea, although that's actually the novel. Doesn't matter. What do we think of? Why am I talking to you? You're not going to be able to answer. Of Colin Baker's waistcoat. I do like the shirt with the checked lining, but no, it's still a bit. The trousers are still a bit much. They're quite high as well. Why has everybody got high trousers in this? That's the problem with braces. You see, I like braces. They're quite fun, but they do pull your trousers up a bit much. So yes, so they're in. Right. Poor old Perry has to go and put herself in the firing line. It's funny because if this was modern Doctor Who, they'd be almost crying now, going, "You're like nobody I've ever met before, but can you go? But we've both got to go and put ourselves in mortal danger." And they would make it like they were never going to see each other again. Whereas here, it's just like, you go and do that. I'll do this. This is the order of the day. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but and I love poor old Oscar being left there. You're just an out of work actor, mate. You're useless. And he's Shock Eye is tarting himself up for a night on the town. I love that idea. Oh, we've got him and Troughton going to the restaurant in the next episode, which I'm sure I'm going to thoroughly enjoy. I wasn't wild about the Androgum sort of makeup at the time. I think it's because of its colouring. I think it seemed a bit like because Russ Abbott was doing his Scottish character. You could do that in comedy those days. It was just like, what's your character? It's a nationality. Is See You Jimmy? I think anything sort of red eyebrowed, it was like you're doing a comical Scotsman, and even. So I think I slightly rejected considering what the plot is going to be. I wasn't as fond of the whole Androgum thing then as now. I was much more interested in, the Sontarans and the Time Lords and all of that. Yeah, it's the sucked in cheeks, I think, look a bit. There's nothing wrong with that as a concept. It's just the proportions are a bit odd. Or maybe it's just taste. Maybe I just don't. Yeah. But looking at them now, they're not as... Again, the beard should be spikier. Bristles, that's the word I was looking for. Bristles rather than fur. Fuck. He does it all so well, Troughton. And I think that was the other thing. I didn't want to see Troughton being an Androgum because I wanted to see Troughton being the second Doctor, who I love. And if I was, that would be a bit like watching an old Doctor Who if he's being the old Doctor Who, not if he's being an Androgum. I mean, it works having Clinton Green being very tall in terms of the dynamic of this story. I love the little mini chainsaw that he's got. That's a lovely little visual effects prop. Visual effects doing very well. That and the sticky pin things. And this, I do like this little bit of business where Anita gives the Doctor a kiss, and then Fraser, sorry, Jamie, oh, the line is very blurred. He wants a kiss and he doesn't get one. Oh, and of course, in real life, if Jamie was a young Jacobite, he'd have been probably quite unreconstructed in his attitude towards young ladies. But I love what Fraser brings to it. The sort of the innocence and the stupidity is too harsh. The game simplicity, shall we say? Oh, even the way he sort of stands and leans in and strokes his neck. Ah, he's perfect, John Stratton. He's perfect. If I could choose him again, I would. He's like a piratical... Yeah, he's a piratical chef. But he's really... He buys into the whole sort of sensual thing of it. And Jacqueline Pearce is good because she's got to convince you that she's got this sort of augmentation thing going on, but that also she has... Then we can cook her. That she's got the sort of vestiges of that savagery within her that she's fighting against. And her skill is very much that sort of, as I said before, I think sensual longing that, Servalan kind of had. You always got the impression that she was crying that she couldn't screw somebody who was now dead. Is that in space? It was sort of, yes. It was... yes, it was sort of thwarted science fiction sensuality. And none of this, it's all wonderful. The emotion that she brings to it, I think, is great. I think Servalan is superb. And And again, I thought that more as I've got older. I remember watching Blake Seven originally. I didn't quite get some. I knew she was the baddie, and I didn't like her. But of course, I didn't like her because she was the baddie. But I actually, on subsequent revisits to Dastari, Lawrence Payne crashes into the mobile chair there. I love his disgust at Shockeye. But on subsequent rewatches of Blake Seven, I've really admired what Jacqueline Pearce brings to Servalan. It's a truly great performance, and as I say, I had the. Did I say last time I had the pleasure of working with her on a Big Finish, but she did sort of float in rather, and it was when somebody asked her a question, she sort of answered it as if she wasn't there. Perfectly nice, but I thought slightly on a different plane. And have you heard the commentary for this? She just spends the whole thing going, "Oh, did I, darling? I don't remember." I seem to recall that there's not a massive amount of insight, but an awful lot of charming vagary. I like that chair, actually. That's a wonderful contraption, isn't it? It's like a rocking chair on wheels. I love that. Madam. In the kitchen. Oh, it's glorious. That's a really shiny Baco foil top, isn't it? It's like kaleidoscopic Baco foil. No. What's he got in his hat? Has he got sort of fishing flies in his hat? It's great. Loving it. Oh yeah, she gives a great sense. Yes, and the little hand movement. Oh boy, she's good. I love those two. They complement each other very well, but you get a shared of shared history. And I love this bit. It's because Stike grabs Jamie, doesn't he? I love the confrontation. I don't think that's till next week, but I remember loving that bit. I do think Clinton Grain is great as Stike, even though he's too tall and has too many fingers. Does he have too many fingers? I think he does. How many fingers do the Sontarans have? I seem to recall they get more fingers as they go along as well. Again, it always seems a bit weird when we go, we've got these aliens and they have these specific things that are different about them. Yeah, well, let's get rid of those and make them a bit more the same. How many fingers have they got? Oh, no, they've got 3 fingers. Good. Is it that they don't have 3 fingers now? Can't remember. Don't give it the power it doesn't have, Toby. So this is nice. This is making use of the location, and poor old Perry. Oh gosh, it's not long of a chase. I think I'd imagine maybe it was a bit like the Caves of Androzani, where they seem to run around forever. She didn't get far. That's a terrific shot. Yes. And that's, of course, far longer than you would do that for, but he sustains it with his sort of slight wobbly, it's almost like DTs, it's almost like sort of he's got his nerves are slightly shot. You get the impression that he's drunk a lot. Shockeye, he's pickled. He sort of probably drinks alcoholic vinegar. Well, I enjoyed that after, I think, quite a slow starter. I think you're dying for it to get off the space station, and it takes a while. Interesting that the first episode you spend a lot of time with Patrick Troughton going, where's Colin Baker? It's his show. And then you're spending a lot of time with Colin Baker at the beginning of this one going, yeah, but actually where Patrick Troughton is where it's more interesting. So I can see it sort of, it didn't need to be the 3 episodes, but of course, because it's the one in Spain and because it's the one with Patrick Troughton, you want as long with those things as possible. Tony Burrow, Oscar-nominated designer. Have I talked about him? Maybe I'll talk about him next week. That's the problem when, as I say, I recorded episode 1, part 1, as the DVD menu reminds me. Quite some time ago. So, I enjoyed that. What are Matt's? Oh, I've got to choose my favourite things. My favourite things about that episode. Well, I do think there's lots of nice little props, and as Matt chose the manipulation of the Gumblejack and the little bits of business that the actors did, I'm not sure he won't be averse to picking on the tiny little bits of attention to detail. I love the little things that go into Fraser Hines's neck and stick, and then and it's, you know the trick of when the needle goes in, but actually when he pulled it out, it's like the needle retracted as well. And there's a lot of little mechanisms you have to do to make that work, and the stick as well. And it pulled at his neck. I thought that was a lovely tiny little bit of detail. I like the little the mini chainsaw because it got a little. It looked like a sort of Hath gun bit, the breathing apparatus that the Hath have, a sort of spirit level thing attached to it, and the wheelchair, rocking chair business, the sort of old fashioned wooden wheelchair. I like it. So little bits of proppage I liked very much. So should we call that visual effects, set decoration? Those bits I liked those. And what else is it? Jamie's kiss. No, I think it's got to be the confrontation between Stike and the Doctor, because you've got a lot going on there. You've got Clinton Grain doing some great work, scratching his face, the eye acting that he does. He's behind a mask, but he's really selling it, and he seems to know where the camera is and how to get the best out of his performance, depending on where he's being shot from, which is not to be underestimated. And Troughton's gambit is great. I'm the Doctor, I'm going to do this. This isn't the best plan in the world, but it's the only one I've got, and I'm not quite sure even what it is, but I know I've got to get him to accept my challenge for a duel, which he doesn't do, and he does that wonderful, oh, well, that didn't work, did it? And also he says, oh, crumbs, not in that bit, but so yeah, Troughton and Stike, Doctor and Stike, and the little visual effects, props, set decoration. What has Matt chosen?
So episode 2 then. Again, lots to pick. Really tricky to pick it down to 2 things, but love John Stratton as Shockeye. I bet he had immense fun playing that. And again, a bit of actor's business, this time with a rat, only he doesn't throw his prey back into the water this time. And Patrick Troughton as the second Doctor, obviously blissful to see him back in the role. I love the fact that he was okay with his Doctor being weak, scared, etc. And oh my goodness, oh my giddy aunt, oh crumbs, that sort of stuff. Wonderful.
Now, do you know what? I feel I get both of those because where I'm at a disadvantage, where if somebody chooses something before me, so if like it happened with Fusham in the Seeds of Death some time ago, somebody chooses something before me, I then can't choose it afterwards. But if I choose something in episode 1 that somebody then subsequently chooses, that's points for me that I've got in the bag. So I chose John Stratton last time, so I get a point for that. And I think it would have been straightforward to have gone and Patrick Troughton, but I picked out the crumbs and the confrontation. I think I'm allowed both of those points. I think I stand so little chance of ever winning. I'm not going to judge. I'm not going to penalise myself for not getting exactly when actually we were celebrating the same things. Even though I honed in on the scene between him and Stike, but it was partially because of the crumbses and the fact that he was doing such a good job whilst being vulnerable that Matt alluded to, and because I think we were coming from the same place. And I try not to choose a character or an actor because I think that's so obvious for me to do it. It would be really boring because I would just go Patrick Troughton, John Stratton, Jacqueline Pearce, Lawrence Payne, James Saxon. Do you know what I mean? I could have chosen any of those things. So I tried to go off piste for me and actually choose a scene. But one of the main reasons was Troughton. So write in if you like. Write to the producer. He won't fire me because he's me. Write to the exec. He won't fire me because it's me. Write to the presenter. It's me. I'm in charge. I'm in charge of this place. Who's that? That's Peter Miles in Doctor and the Silurians. Oh, nobody's done. Somebody has chosen that to do, but hasn't sent the video. That is the bit I'm going to choose for that. It's Dr. Lawrence's death scene in is it episode 7? I think it is. He dies in the last episode, which is just magnificent. Or is it episode 6? Does it matter? Yeah, no, I'm sure it's the last episode. I'm in charge of this. Are you going? Why am I talking about Doctor Who and the Silurians? Oh, because, you know, I can love Peter Miles and Dr. Lawrence right now. That's a great story. Stop talking about a different Doctor Who story. I like Doctor Who. I like this episode is the first episode of the Happy Times and Places I have recorded since the news that Russell T Davies is coming back to Doctor Who. And so I'm buoyant because actually through doing these, I've had the chance to see, and during lockdown with the tweet-alongs and stuff, I went back to a lot of Russell T Davies era Doctor Who that I hadn't watched for a good long time. And again, it was looking at the past. I was going, I used to get so cross about little bits of here and what I might think people would think of that. I loved it. But I used to get so furious about things that worried me or disappointed me. And a lot of things that worried me, I look back on now and go, why did I worry about that? Why? Madness. Because everything was so perilous. I think the idea that Doctor Who could be cancelled any minute. And because, of course, when this was on, when the Two Doctors was on, was pretty much when they announced that Doctor Who, the hiatus was going to happen, and Doctor Who was violent and unimaginative. And there's a lot of violence here. So yeah, was it during the broadcast of the Two Doctors it was announced? I think it may well have been. I will have to check and come back to you next week if I remember. You'll know anyway. You'll look it up, and I'll look it up and check and remind myself, and then I might not remember to tell you. Well, I can't do everything, but it was certainly around this time that Doctor Who was, so suddenly the thing that had been a constant, as I say, in an emotionally peripatetic childhood, where Saturday night was the anchor and the only certainty, and the only thing that was mine, apart from during this episode when I had to move my shoes, which was obviously such a moment that I can still remember it, and it looms large, and I still slightly resent it. But as I said to that young fan, don't bring your resentments with you. That's what gives them power. But isn't that? But looking at the past, looking at Russell T Davies's Doctor Who, which is so brilliant, reminding myself how brilliant it was, and how lucky we were. And I think, and I say, oh, we didn't appreciate it. We did, because I loved, and I looked forward to Doctor Who every week when it came back. It was a thrill. It was like being a kid again. So that's where the nostalgia is helpful, like being a kid again. I didn't mean to use that phrase, and that brings with it. And I wasn't, as I say, childhood can be scary and frightening. And I looked at a kid in the park today looking for conkers, and he was so sort of gleeful, but I also thought so vulnerable, because those are the times when you're bullied as well. So you can be gleeful about a conker, but then crying because somebody said something cruel or unkind. So I think that's why childhood is such a draw, isn't it? It's because when we were perhaps slightly more in touch with our emotions, which is why you think of it as being, oh, I'm an excited child, but also that emotional response to Fleetwood Mac of I found myself close to tears, really weirdly, because it reminded me of also a time when emotions were perhaps rawer. But is that a better way to be than being sort of having your edges dulled by life and mortgages and having to worrying about shoes being in the hall, or what I've been doing today? It's a Sunday. I've been tidying the house because that's what grown-ups do. I put bleach around the toilet and thought, yeah, Toby, you're a grown-up. That's what grown-ups do. That's what they do. That grown-ups. You shouldn't still be getting that at 47, going, yeah, I'm a grown-up because I put bleach around the rim of the toilet because I don't live with my mother anymore. So what am I talking about? I don't know. The past. Never mind Spain being another country. The past. Yeah. So maybe I was wrong about saying to that young lad. Well, no, I wasn't. The past is very, very powerful. But I guess you have to decide what you want to draw from it. And if you draw the things... And it wasn't an unhappiness when Fleetwood Mac made me cry. It was just at the sort of profundity of the fact that we can still touch ourselves through time, if you like. I'm worried I'm sounding pretentious now, but I did. It was quite a moment, and I think that's part of the appeal of Doctor Who, is because it keeps us in touch with our childhood. But what's interesting about Russell coming back, it's got nothing to do with the two Doctors, is that I wasn't a kid when Doctor Who came back, and yet I still had that excitement, and Doctor Who still did. That's what surprised me when Doctor Who came back. It still did what it had done to me when the two Doctors was on. And this week, I think, has reminded me that it can still do it again, and it's always done it. Good old Doctor Who. So that was a bit tonally all over the place, wasn't it? I had a lot of fun. I think I got a bit pretentious. Certainly lots of unnecessarily rambling. But enough about the episode. The commentary was pretty much the same as well. But look, it is what it is. It's a man watching Doctor Who and saying what comes into his mind. And for better or worse, that man is me. There were two Doctors, so just be grateful there was only one of me watching part 2 of the two Doctors, or the episode where I had to move my shoes. Well, welcome everybody. It's very dark here in Hadoke Towers. It's gone 1 a.m. and I should be going to bed, but I've just been catching up with The Walking Dead, and that reminded me that I have a grotesque instalment of Doctor Who still to do, and I thoroughly enjoyed part 2 of The Two Doctors, which, as you heard, I am watching with Matt Hayden, a friend of mine, a cineast, a man of culture and erudition, and also base humour and low morals. He's a good mix, is Matt, but he's not a dyed-in-the-wool Who fan. So his perspective is an interesting one. His choice is an interesting one. A story that I know many dislike. I've always had a soft spot for it. And as I say, one illustrious person I know thinks it the worst script ever written for Doctor Who. And this is a person who likes the work of Robert Holmes, as I do. So anyway, let's see what delights on the menu as we go for part 3. I am on the DVD. I am on episode selection. So I'm going to press enter now for part 3. And fans of last episode of Happy Times and Places hopefully weren't throwing things at their stereo or headphones or computer or however you digest this hourly, because I was correct. It was between episodes 2 and 3 of The Two Doctors that the cancellation/hiatus of Doctor Who was announced by the BBC, called as it was by Michael Grade, violent and unimaginative, and we're just about to have a pretty grim episode, which some could say justifies his argument. And let's not get into whether it was a hiatus or a cancellation. I think the clever money is on they were going to cancel it, and there was so much uproar that they had to change their minds. So I don't know what's in why Shockeye has a bullet belt. I don't know what's in there. Presumably herbs and spice. He's just got sort of paprika that he can spray on any passing creature that he slaughters for the table. Or does he say you're a fine fleshy beast? I love that. And ripe for the table, for the knife. I love it. And I love this little, that's just a little thing they've worked out where they go, well, he can. And I like the fact that they're sort of strong, but they don't make a meal of that, if you'll excuse me. But I like the way he just does that little sort of bash that a chef would know could knock out a creature. He doesn't have to use force. He just knows which nerve to hit, which I like. I haven't mentioned Val much, have I? Val was, for many years, my favourite Sontaran, because he was my first Sontaran, even though he took off his helmet in long shot. But the more times I've watched this, the more times he doesn't actually do anything, except occasionally goes, "Yes, sir." Have I talked about the fact that Stike is Welsh? He's one of, in an honourable tradition of I will leave none of you alive here. I would dearly love to kill you, Doctor. Did I do that last week? Last week. I only did it yesterday. And when I do the android invasion, Stigron is Welsh, even though the actor that plays Stigron is not. I was convinced for years he was. Science Chadaki. But he was actually, I think he was from Hampstead, Martin Friend. But so I don't know what it is about playing monsters that sometimes makes you sound Welsh, whether you're supposed to be or not. Would you really operate a computer bank with a gun? But it's a nice piece of business. But and I like this. I like this scene. This was Doctor Who to me. The Doctor being confronted by the monster, Jamie in mortal peril. I always loved the fact that Jamie had a knife in his sock. Since I read about it in Tomb of the Cybermen, I mean, you wouldn't now. But as I've said before, knives were containable. Knives were the less bad thing. It was guns that were visceral and nasty. Knives were, so people had knives. We had pen knives. Seems extraordinary now, but I love the joke of this. Sontarans are invincible. I'll stab him in the knee. But I love this. There's going to be a laser beam. I love a laser beam and a well-placed explosion where the laser beam hits. I love that. That's all brilliant. Love that. I think that's all great. He's got the knife sticking out. I love that whole sequence because it's sort of Doctor Who's not often that action-packed in the studio. It's hard to look good. With sort of multi-camera, it's really hard to stage, and even now, I think when soaps do action-packed episodes, they struggle sometimes because we're not used to doing it particularly. But this is the beginning of Styke's descent, where he's bleeding green goo, which you always like a bit in Doctor Who. And it's the running gag of every time we see Styke, he gets progressively more knackered. But yes, Tim, I know. I read an interview with Tim Rainham in a Doctor Who magazine, summer special, who plays Val, who I think had written to the Doctor Who production team quite a lot, but he'd written and sort of said, seeing as you've cast that really ugly actress, Nicola Bryant, you need somebody beautiful like me, because I think he was alluding to the fact that I don't think he necessarily would consider himself a looker. He was inverting the idea that, because Nicola Bryant is a very beautiful woman. And so he rather wittily got himself the part. Good for him. I'm not sure he's ever responded to any requests since for interview. I know some of the chaps who track down actors have had no luck with him, although he's still about. But anyway, I admire his chutzpah. Whenever I've tried to display chutzpah to get cast in things, because I'm not very good at playing the game like that. That's an example of somebody being, taking a risk and it paying off. And I like that. Trevor Cooper did a similar thing. I think one of his early, yes, he's going to say yes, sir, isn't he? Sir, that's what he does. But bless him, he got to go to Spain. Trevor Cooper, I think, when I said to him, well, you played the jailer in A Winter's Tale. That was really early in your career. And I think he'd basically written and said, can I play? I think I could probably play Hermione, but if you've cast that part, I suppose I could do the jailer or something like that. Or he said, I really, really want to play the jailer, or failing that, you could cast me as Hermione. It was something. It was one of those. And I've always just tried to sort of be nice. And every time I've tried to be sort of charming or funny, you can see it never quite works. I never quite know how to take it. So I don't know why, what it is about me, who I think can be, funny and quick-witted on stage as a comic. I've got away with it in front of rooms and rooms of people. On a one-on-one situation where it gets me a job, I've always fouled it up. So whilst I admire the chutzpah of Tim Rainham, part of me is devastated that such a thing can pay off when other people try it. When I try it, that I end up mucking it up somehow. There's his fags. There's his fags and lighter. Shockey's fags and lighter in his tummy. Now, interestingly, a dear old friend of mine, Sarah from university, was teaching in Stockport or somewhere, and she said, "Can you come and show my kids some?" This was after I'd left university and was sort of jobbing about. She said, "Can you come and show my students some sci-fi? I'm trying to teach them about sci-fi." So I showed them bits of I think I showed this scene where he's, oh no, maybe it's the later one where he's sizing up Jamie and talking about Jamie as we would talk about livestock. And I brought him some X-Files as well, this hoary old sequence where John Finn and David Duchovny are walking round down a corridor, and it's a massive exposition dump to try and make it, tying it up with historical events and lots of stock footage and trying to sound important because it was tying it in with Vietnam and JFK and all of that. And it was appalling. It was an appalling screed of pseudo portentousness. And of course they loved that and they thought the Doctor Who looked rubbish. But I have. He's just lopsided. They do lopsided. Those collars, I think, are unforgivable. And I know the actors are in Spain, and that's a brilliant shot, and so need to breathe. But they're untucked. I think it's unforgivable. And I remember this. Yes, because it's the sort of betrayal of Shockeye. Because of course they have to zap him because he talks about fouling the blood of the Cornsea Grig. So they're genetic purists as well, or Shockeyes, as well as being a horrible butcher. But I quite like that. I think I just like a laser beam, but I like the sort of dramatic subjugation of Shockeye there. But yes, as I think I said last night, I wasn't particularly taken with the idea of Patrick Troughton having to androgum it up for a bit, because I wanted to see, perhaps I'm into purity, I wanted to see his pure Doctor. So what was I talking about? So hang on. Yes, I got annoyed with the collars. I was talking about, doesn't matter, it'll come back to me. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. Now, Dastari confuses me in this episode because he's doing because we know he's a friend of the Doctor, and I love all that stuff with him in Troughton at the beginning, where he's obviously a decent scientist who's just, wanting to advance science. But then he gets sort of all a bit sarky. And now, having got to the point where he's doing the next progression of his experiment, having laid waste to his own space station and not sort of questioned anything, he's now suddenly gone, it's halfway through episode 3. I think the only way they're going to get rid of me is if I develop a conscience and my own creation has to finish me off. But Lawrence Payne's very dignified performance, even though he looks like a member of Buggles. Dastari killed the Androgum Star. Augmentation killed the Androgum Star. I think he's great. And I'm glad Peter Moffat knew his actors well enough to call an actor out of retirement. Oh yes, I was teaching the students, and I've never forgotten, because when I showed them the scene of Jamie, I wanted them to go, oh yes, they're treating Jamie like we treat animals. I wanted them to pick up on the fairly obvious sort of metaphor there, the subtext of how we talk about animals. The we's of this story is that we are suddenly the livestock. And I said, so what's your first impression of that? And this young lad went, low budget. And I went, no. And I immediately went, no. And then sort of said, well, no, what I was looking for was, and tried to get him to talk about the subject matter. But the fact that I was so quick on when they said low budget, that's an interesting observation. I should have been able to go say, okay, what makes you think that compared to the X-Files and blah, blah, blah? And they much preferred the X-Files clip, even though it was nonsense. But I, as a teacher, as it were, should not have been so quick to react, because I was reacting because of the own scars I bore about Doctor Who being, dismissed as being low budget, etc., etc. So, and it's always stuck with me, and I hope that child wasn't put off an academic career or an interest in media studies or indeed science fiction because of a teacher that brought his own private grief to the classroom. But I still remember it. An Androgum. Now, these two have an awful lot of fun doing this, and I rather enjoy it. But as I say, I wasn't too hot at the time, and those eyebrows are a livid red, aren't they? But I do like the idea of these two old gents going around eating everything. Oh, and so this is where they must have been baking in that teat. I always think it's a bit lazy when the baddies kill the baddies, but you sort of have to have it in Doctor Who. But they used to do it in 24 all the time. In 24, after about 6 episodes, you tell that the producers had got bored of the villain, so then they'd get a super villain to come and kill the previous villain, because, they'd go, oh, you haven't killed Jack Bauer. Instead of going, let's work together to kill Jack Bauer, they go, I'm going to kill you. And all the other underlings go, that's just what we do, we kill each other when it doesn't work. And that actor, I think viewers, we need to escalate the villainy, so now we've got a villain who's at a higher level in villain towers. No, it's weird because in 24 the villain was not afraid to kill people, but of course Doctor Who generally, and except for there's always an exception that proves the rule. Generally, look, the collar goes right up to his nose. I'm sorry, I know I have to accentuate the positive, but I'm not a fan of the collars. I'm glad they've got a probic vent, but I remember being cross because I loved it. I knew that the Sontarans could be killed by a probic vent, and then suddenly this acid stuff kills them, and you're like, no, I wanted them to get killed by the probic vent because that's how Sontarans die. Because I'd read them in the books. So Val gets a fairly crap death, bless him. That canister has blown up quite near him, and so that's killed him. But I think the timing of when the sparks hit Stike there, it does look like the acid is hitting his face, and then the green stuff is sort of sprouting out. And I think that's just by a sort of accident of the sparks where they are and the camera angle and the way it turns. But it does look like it's hitting him, and the sort of the face guts are sort of spurting out. So that's actually quite effective. And I remember the first time seeing that, going, oh, that looks pretty grim. But if you examine it, it's not how it first appears. But that's the beauty of sometimes a shot can cheat, even though that wasn't I'm sure the intention either. They just lucked out, but very good. But yeah, I did want them to get killed by probic vent because that was one of the pieces of Doctor Who lore that I'd learnt from the Target books. Because as I say, this is the first time I'd seen the Sontarans. Because I discovered so much of Doctor Who through the Target books. So there was nothing more exciting than the end of Part 1 of Earthshock. And I think that excitement of my generation seeing the Cybermen for the first time. Yay, Stike's still alive. Covered in... It's quite an indignity, and I think it's quite funny, isn't it? Because he spends the whole thing being this sort of military guy, and they give him the swagger cane, and he's certainly the most sort of militaristic in the way that in the sense that we understand it and I identify it. Previous Sontarans have been militaristic. Kevin Lindsay had a great sort of gate and clip delivery and stuff, but Stike's got a swagger cane and stand at ease and all of that. They sort of labour it slightly, but the fact that he's got all of that, and so sort of has pretensions of being a sort of officer type, and then spends the whole of episode 3 just getting smacked to bits and getting... Now, I seem to recall, it's rather sad that in the Doctor Who magazine archive of these, that nobody knows the name of this poor Spanish extra who plays the driver, and you'd have thought somebody would have written it down to commit him to history, but because he doesn't have a line, I think he's a stuntman because he has to do that, and again, I think that's quite a nice suggestion of the strength of the Androgam, because if you hit somebody on the back with a log, they wouldn't die, but clearly he has big strength, because yes, they emphasize the fact that a man has been killed. I mean, they don't check, but yes, we don't know who that or we didn't at the time. Somebody clever might have found out since who the lorry driver is, but as it's an actor, I will never be able to, sort of knock on the door of. I don't think I mean, I'd love to travel to Seville Seville, but I think I would have trouble justifying it to my family and indeed the taxman to go. I'm going there to interview the man who gets hit by the log from the two doctors. I love this music. And this is very funny because he's getting into his MFI time machine. I mean, and of course, because he's done that, so that's a nice little plot placing of the Doctor's trick. The Doctor's trick to Stike, and then he has to fall out, and he's covered in even more green. And then he has the indignity of having to post double line to explain that he thinks that Cassini has double-crossed him, or whatever it is he says there. I think that's definitely done in post. And this is where they have the obligatory, we're in a foreign location. Do you remember Arc of Infinity 4? We are now going to run around the streets a lot, because that's what you do when you're on location. It's almost like you don't need to have much that's going on in the story, because the story has been substituted by location. I think now we go, well, let's tell the story within the location. But in those days, you could go, well, we've done one, so we actually don't have to do the other. Those were the days. It's like as if going abroad was enough. Do we have to do anything else? No, we've gone abroad. That's that the viewers will be going. Will be so agog that they can see Spain on their living room television in Slough or Wigan. They'll be so dazzled by the foreign climb that we don't need to burden them with story or plot. I actually do quite enjoy watching actors having fun. I think there's probably less patience for it now. And I'm not sure the world is a better place. I think seeing two old thesps lording it about Spain in top hats, and the way that he's washing his hands, and I like the way that Troughton describes the food. They do the food stuff in this very well. The shepherd's pie joke is very good earlier. But the thing that the light salad with artichoke hearts, but all the digestive juices, all of that, I think they do all of that really, really well. It's like the pan frying the gumblejack in its own juices. The way that the food is described, I think the way he makes a simple salad, because he's quite clever. He doesn't just go for the relish of the sort of gourmand stuff. Even a simple light salad. And I like food, and I like different foods, and I think that captures the beauty of eating, but of course then just juxtaposes it with the fact that actually it's a very functional thing, and we as humans dress up what is actually a very functional thing, consuming fuel, and because we're apes with ideas above our station. We sort of dress it up and go, oh, well, this is very severe. No, what you're doing is you're slaughtering a thing and you're gorging on its flesh. But that will make it sound very sophisticated. There's Peter Moffat, the director, having a glass of wine. And that's Mercedes Carnegie, isn't it, who is the sort of fixer that they had over there. So gave her a charming cameo, which if you were ill-disposed towards this here, you go, oh, that's just indulgent. But I actually quite like it. I quite like Dastari getting the rose. I think it's quite a sweet moment. It doesn't lead to anything. It doesn't have anything to do with anything else. This, I think, that good tongue acting. I like a Sontaran tongue. Always like a Sontaran tongue. And you think that's the end of Stike. He does have one more moment to shine. And we have had the setup of the ship self-destructing. So that all ties in, although it's not, because you don't see him go into the ship. It's not brilliantly clear, but it's it's all right. I really like Oscar. I've said this before. I think James Saxon is very, very good. And yes, so Robert Holmes is very good at. Do we serve humans here? His reply is very nice. And he just calls him a fawning imbecile, doesn't he? That idea that we we can we kid ourselves that, well, or is it what separates us from the animals? Our enjoyment of food, that it's more than just something to keep us alive and to keep us alert so that we don't get preyed upon ourselves, is perhaps what separates us from the animals. But also, it is a very functional thing, and it goes in one end and comes out the other, and we don't eulogize the latter, so why do we get so fancy about the former? But I'm interested in that sort of that contradiction within us. Colin Baker does the fancying the cat acting very well. I totally believe that he wants to eat that cat. And I wonder, could we cut to other adventures where each of the other doctors is getting very hungry? I'm sure you could probably do it. I wonder if you could do it with existing stories where the doctor's sort of getting a bit famished. You could have Davison eating his celery, couldn't you? Pertwee suddenly in Day of the Daleks go, I very like this wine and blue cheese. It's actually because this is when the Andriggum inheritance is taking its toll. I'm surprised somebody hasn't done a Short Trips or some such where suddenly each of the other incarnations of the Doctor is hankering for scran. I'm not sure of the timeline here, because they've eaten. Because a family paella would take a paella. I think takes quite a good long time to cook if you're going to do it properly. So I don't get the impression that the others have been searching for quite that long. But it's worth it for the phrase "a gargantuan repast," which is a lovely phrase that I think I have occasionally used myself. I think that says quite a lot about me, that I occasionally have unconsciously used Oscar Botcherby's dialogue. Not somebody cool, not somebody hard or villainous or exciting, not even the Doctor, the hero. I've used an absurd actor, an absurd out-of-work actor who murders moths. And is the subject of a very controversial moment in this episode. But before we get to that, that extra's giving that waiter a bit of stick. I don't know what that's about. Do they not like? Have they been told, oh, you're not really enjoying what they're getting up to? I think John Stratton's brilliant at this, sort of going, what's this? He's not being villainous here. He's enjoying his meal and going, but what's this? And then I like the fact that instead of going, I'm not going to give you money, he goes, no, that's what we do, yeah. This is our tally. Yeah, I like that. That, lazier writing would go, I'm the villain, I don't expect to pay. He just expects to pay. It's just that he doesn't realise that the 20 Narg note is not accepted. But the waiter that was being given stick, I think or certainly one of the, I think it's the one is Nedjet Salih, who was Ali Osman in EastEnders about a year later, one of the first regulars in EastEnders, but he did bits of extra work. I remember seeing him pop up, I think, as one of the background builders in Auf Wiedersehen Pet, and he's there in Doctor Who a year before becoming a soap opera regular in EastEnders. I've seen him crop up in other stuff since, but I think EastEnders was the biggest flowering of his career. And I like the whole acidized my digestive juices, because I have to say, if somebody's nagging me when I'm eating, it's just like, can I just finish my tea? But this, how do we feel about this, everybody? I would be interested. On my Patreon page, I have a lot of the kind people who contribute there, that when I post these up, give their opinions. Hello, Sabrina Tirabassi, and Guy Lambert, and Ruben and Joe Llewellyn, lots of lovely people there. I'd be interested in your opinion of that. I as a kid, I mean, thought this was Doctor. I like Doctor Who being gritty and violent because it was a riposte to the idea that I was obsessed with the idea that people thought Doctor Who was a children's program. Even though I was 11, I was like, yeah, but I'm not watching kids stuff. I'm watching stuff that grown-ups like. It's made by the drama department, you know. I was desperate for it to be grown up. Of course, now I sometimes see things that are desperate to be grown up are the most childish. I mean, the fact that the first grown-up thing Torchwood tried to do was an orgasm monster, I thought was so silly. And I, in fact, wrote a sketch where the next episode it will be a monster that hides itself in alien knickers and can only be defeated by swearing. And I found this terribly shocking. And that's a quote from Hamlet that Colin does very well, but unfortunately they then sort of largely forget about poor old Oscar now. And by the time they get to film, which is obviously made in a different country and at a different time, it's like he never died at all. Which I think is often a problem with the original Doctor Who, is that you know, things don't have consequences beyond a couple of scenes. And I know that sometimes people don't like more modern Doctor Who because emotions carry on, through episodes and beyond. But that is more sort of realistic. If you'd seen a man murdered, you wouldn't be squabbling about which direction to go in. And the way he says, "Where are you, Anita? I can't see you," I think is terribly touching, because the idea that and quite sort of grim and grotesque, and yet the idea that this terrible actor, you know, even at his death, you know, he does this kind of he gives himself his moment. He gives himself his rather wonderful death scene that is sort of better than he would have done if he'd been acting. If he had been playing, he'd have been a terrible Hamlet. You never got to see my definitive Hamlet. So it's still full of great jokes. But it is rather sad because James Saxon is so very good, because it's a stabbing. I mean, I think that is, and I know some people who think that's terribly misjudged, and I would find it hard to argue with them, apart from the fact that I've found the scene, you know, sad and horrible, and the violence, you know, turned my stomach in a way, so it sort of did its job, and yet it's therefore entertainment, and we're being entertained in a story that's telling us about how, poorly we treat livestock, whilst at the same time perpetrating some pretty grim and unpleasant violence under the guise of children's tea time entertainment. So I'm aware it's a slightly schizophrenic piece, but I find the scene of Oscar's death actually to be rather well done, but its very presence probably to be, I would probably reluctantly have to say it's misjudged, because he's a great character and it's a pretty horrible thing to do to him. But then this is a story with a grotesque sense of humour, as evidenced by Shockeye coming in with Stike's leg, which I think is terribly funny. I've just been watching The Walking Dead, which has much more grotesque stuff than any Doctor Who of this period, although you can tell that they've enjoyed Earthshock and Resurrection of the Daleks and gone, why don't we try and make Doctor Who this grim and grown up all the time? And Robert Holmes has gone, yeah, but I'm going to throw jokes into mine. And I have to say, I like that, you know, The Walking Dead is good fun and very, really well made, and it's got lots of, but actually, there's very rarely a sort of sense of humour amongst the grand guignol, the grotesqueness, whereas the whole point of Stike getting more and more injured is to sort of revel rather blackly in the grim humour of it. So he's put through all of these indignities until the point where he ends up as half a leg, which is supposed to be funny, and which is funny. Colin Baker's very good at the reassuring wink. And there's something very, even though he's this sort of catty, scatty, spiky doctor, he does have a reassuring nature that I'm so pleased to see him bestow upon young, nervous fans, or even young fans who really know who he was in the early days of the sort of resurgence of the show, and fans would be at Doctor Who conventions, and so sort of aware of the classics, but he would never let that faze him, and treated everybody like he was a reassuring doctor. I think he's a great ambassador for the show, and a very nice man. And I'm sure I've mentioned the first Doctor I ever met, and I couldn't have been luckier. He was very kind. And I do think I think he's sometimes given some rotten lines, but I think he always does them as well as they can be done. Can I cook one of the humans? And he has the Jack. I like the fact that he's that's what Robert Holmes does very well. Instead of saying, "Can I have the male? Can I have the Jack?" You know exactly what he means, but it complements the vocabulary that has been used thus far. It gives it a suitably alien but not outlandish sort of verbal palette, vocabulary. Very good. And just the use of the word Jack, I think he just has little sprinkles of cleverness there. Well, now what's Dastari doing? Dastari's a prick. So nice, conscience-stricken Dastari goes, but I'll leave the keys there. I mean, so you might be able to try and escape. So is he being mean there and going, I'll leave them just out of the reach to tempt you, in which case that doesn't tie in with the sort of nice conscience-stricken Dastari we see a bit, fairly soon. So it's just poor old Lawrence Payne is having to do, I think, contradictory things. But and I like the little bits that they have where they speak in unison to remind you that they're both the same person. And I like that because Troughton is sort of the nicest Doctor in a way, because he's so sort of jolly and pix-like, but he's an absolute dick when he's with another Doctor. The way that he winds up Pertwee and he banters with Colin Baker. He's actually quite a tricky bugger, but what a great face. It's odd that he decided to go. But I've got to have grey hair, because it's just that. But if you're your Doctor, you didn't have grey hair then. But there we go. So yes, I would be interested to see how and you could tweet as well if you like at Hadoke Podcasts to tell me what you think of sort of Oscar's death and the violence. I suppose, which is the sort of headline news about this, because it really well. And there's a bit later, and especially as, of course, I'm supposed to be accentuating the positive. So this is the scene I showed the students where I was, I think, a bad teacher. I think teachers should be slightly loftier and not display their weaknesses. I remember my son's teacher entered Pop Idol and one of them, X Factor, and didn't get through, and I said, oh, that's a shame. He said, yeah, she said the judges were, and instead of going, yeah, it's a shame I did my best and I lost, there was a kind of, oh yeah, they didn't want me because they didn't want, there was umbrage there and a suggestion of foul play or favourite or whatever. And I remember thinking, a teacher shouldn't be doing that. A teacher should be using that, even if she had felt hard done by. She shouldn't have transmitted that to the students. She sort of transmitted to the students, well, I did my best and it didn't pay off, so I will still do my best next time. And I like to think that none of my teachers would have shown such weakness. But of course, nostalgia is full of lies, and my teachers were probably just as imperfect, but I saw them as teachers. Anyway, I don't know. Perhaps I'm just getting old. But I've gone off piste a little bit, but it just reminded. It's because this scene reminded me of a moment where I had shown my weakness when I was in the rare position of being of being able to influence or instruct young people, which doesn't happen very often. There's knives. There's a lot of knives in this. You need knives if you've got a story set in kitchens, of course. But it's quite a bendy knife, this one. I seem to recall. Yes, it's already bent. I don't know why they need. Is it because it's a prop knife? But that's brilliant. Because you see it cut into his trousers and you see the blood. Now I don't know again if that's a little bit of trickery in the imagination doing the work, but the cut really works there. The knife is no longer bent. This is a great shot of the three, but it does look a bit like it's been shot in COVID time with Dastari miles away to the back. It's like when people have a chat in outside the Rovers in Corrie, and there's three people who know each other, but it was actually filmed at the height of COVID, so they're sort of having a conversation in a triangle where everyone's 2 meters apart. So this is COVID in severe. But this is brilliant. The longing that she does there. Jacqueline Pearce is excellent in this. And then you have her succumbing to the beast within. And I am drawn to that very idea that, look how she does that sensual longing. And then Dastari is, it would be enough to set him over the edge if he had any sort of consistent characterization. But I think that's a brilliant moment. I think Jacqueline Pearce does it superbly. But I'm very much drawn to that idea of, what we dress ourselves up as. We are all beasts. We are all animals that get ideas above our station. And what makes us good is our intellect. And sometimes I don't think it's bad to have bad thoughts so long as you don't act upon them. Do you know what I mean? I think sometimes to show that we have a veneer of civilization, we sometimes deny that we think the things that we think, lest other people think bad things of us. And I sort of think, well, no, I think some of our thoughts come from our natural instincts, and what makes us good and decent and better than the animals is that we overcome those instincts with rationality and intelligence. And what makes Doctor Who a great hero is that he doesn't poison people to death and then make a joke. So it's a good job he's not about to do that. I remember I sat in on the Resurrection of the Daleks DVD commentary. I didn't do it. Nick Pegg moderated that, and I remember Eric Saywood saying, "Oh yeah, this bit here. In the script it says the Doctor shoots the two guards just before he goes in and kills Davros." Now, the reason that scene is effective is because the Doctor's going, "I'm going to kill Davros," and you go, "My goodness, Doctor Who doesn't kill people." It's totally undermined if he kills the guards, so I'm glad he didn't kill the guards. But it just showed how Eric Saywood, who I like sort of the toughness, I like some of the no-nonsense of what he brings to Doctor Who, because it is the stuff I sort of liked as a kid. I much preferred that to what I saw as some of the sort of beige walking around spaceships that happened quite a lot in the Davison era. This was much more to my taste. Oh God, his warts look particularly horrible in this shot. Old Shockeye, but this I think is, I'm afraid, again, I know I'm supposed to be accentuating the positive. What I love about Doctor Who is that he doesn't kill people, and he solves things with his wit and with his intellect. And I know as a liberal that makes me a hypocrite, because Doctor Who has blown up many buildings where he hasn't therefore directly dispensed death, and somehow that is more palatable. I'm aware I'm having my liberal cake and eating it, and then giving that liberal cake laced with poison to somebody who dies 20 years later, and that makes me feel like I haven't directly killed them myself. But nonetheless, I think actually having the Doctor directly kill somebody and then making the joke is I think, I'm sorry, Eric Saywood, and the fact that we wanted him to shoot those two guards just out of expedience suggests that, yeah, I know the argument is, well, sometimes I know what Eric Saywood says. He says when you're dealing with violent situations, violence is the only answer, but not for Doctor Who. That Doctor Who is unlike other heroes on the telly in that he doesn't deal death if he can help it. He does, or he or she does. The Doctor does what they do. Good death there. Lawrence Payne wasn't a young man there, and I think he does a good, and it's a good laser gun zap. I like a zap. So poor old Dastari, but again, I mean, he was swimming against the tide of consistency. And then Jamie gets to use his knife. And the whole thing has been set up because the Doctor's done the trick. So I like all the stuff with the time machine and Karts and Reimer, who we never see. I'm surprised somebody's not done a short trips or a little some segue story about Karts and Reimer. The fading there was much better than it was with Patrick Troughton in the restaurant, because obviously take them away, put makeup, come back, take them away, put makeup, come back. So, yes, much as I like the two Doctors, I sort of have to pretend that there's not a bit at the end where the Doctor murders Shockeye, even though Shockeye is a villain. He is, from Shockeye's point of view, he's a chef. He's just dealing with livestock. He's dealing with what he sees as lesser creatures. So although, yes, by our standards, he is villainous. By his standards, he's he's just he's just a particularly pragmatic gourmand. And this is the end of Patrick Troughton in Doctor Who. This is the last we see of Patrick Troughton. So farewell, my favourite. That's the last we see of Patrick Troughton. Goodbye. What a brilliant actor he was. What a fine Doctor. It's a very schizophrenic story, this, isn't it? So we're going to have the punchline now, which is going, well, what we've learnt now that I've just murdered a man is that eating meat is bad. And I've been a vegetarian since I was 11. But I'm not a vegan. So again, you could say, that's hypocritical in that, yes, I won't eat the thing that's directly like an animal, but I will eat stuff that's been produced from kind of some of the same processes. And so we all compromise our morality. There are contradictions in all of our moralities, which is why it ill behoves us to be judgmental of others. I just try to do the best I can, as one man said, but I'm aware of the inherent contradictions. So perhaps I shouldn't be quite so hard on Dastari. In fact, John Stratton gets top guest billing. Very well. Look, I am not. It's really interesting. I am not saying this is a faultless story by any stretch of the imagination. I even have some sympathy with the person that said it was the worst Doctor Who script of all time. No, I don't think I'd go that far at all. But I can see their objections with it in terms of what it pitches, what it says, some of the choices it makes, that sort of schizophrenia that it has. And yet I enjoy it. I enjoy the characters. I enjoy what it has to say. I enjoy some of the jokes, and I think it's a largely effective production. I know Peter Moffat gets, actually hung, drawn and quartered, largely because you don't get the Sontaran mask in close up, and that's enough to go. Then it's terribly directed. I actually think there's some nice direction in places, and also he was so efficient that they got more stuff shot in Spain than was scheduled. And you go, well, when sometimes people didn't even finish making the program, that's worth its weight in gold when you're making television in the 1980s. So, I get to choose three things. Two things from this episode and one bonus thing. So I think the two things I'm going to choose for this episode, I love the gag of, with an honourable mention of that scene, because I used to watch that scene quite a lot. Sometimes I think when I watch the episode, I'd go back and watch that scene again. I love the scene where Stike makes the Doctor get into the time machine, and then Jamie stabs him, and then he shoots the laser. I love that scene because it just excited me. And I remember when I got it on video, having watched this the first time, and I got it on video as a sort of collector, and I remember going, oh, I'd forgotten, oh, this is a really good scene, and it excited me and it thrilled me. But I think Stike will be included, and I think Clinton Grain is excellent as Stike, but I think Stike will be included in my favourite thing is I like the running gag of Stike, of the indignities that Stike suffers from being burnt in the face a bit, to then going in the time machine and melting a bit more, and then going into a spaceship and being blown to bits and just being a leg. I think that's deliberate and very funny, and as a bleak... it excuses some of the grotesqueness in the story because it's obviously done there with a sort of streak of black humour, which I kind of like. And the other thing is, it's got to be that scene where Jacqueline Pearce so brilliantly succumbs to the feral beast within, the creature of, what is it Dastari calls them, a creature of instinct. It's interesting what you say about can a whole race be base creatures of, I think that's quite simplistic to say, well, we can't make the androgams brainy because they're all the same. But we're talking about kids' tea time science fiction, and the what the androgams are is they are alien gourmands. They are creatures who enjoy sensual pleasures. And sometimes in Doctor Who, a whole species can have one characteristic, and that helps with the telling of this story. So, but I'm aware that in perhaps more sophisticated fare, you'd have a hard job getting that past as a thing you can do in a script to say a race is all entirely the same. And I'll be interested to see if Matt brings any of that up, because he does do stuff about cultural sensitivities, and he's very much at the cutting edge of how we deal with such things in these times when we have to be very aware of those things, and rightly so. But nonetheless, that scene that Jacqueline Pearce does so well, and it's a really grim and quite un-Doctor Who-y thing of the Doctor's blood on the step, and she puts it to her face and she licks it, and Dastari's reaction. I think it's an excellent scene and pretty grim as well. But that pull between base instinct and intellectual advancement, if you like, I think is interesting and very well done. So those are my two things for that episode, and I think my thing for the whole thing is I like the central wheeze. I like the conceit of we're on the food chain. That's that's the central metaphor. That's the subtext of much of what is going on. Sometimes not even subtext of suddenly humanity is on the menu, or we're no better than the things we eat. I like anything that cuts us down to size a little bit and examines that. And I think it's littered through the script in very interesting ways. So those are my three things. Let us see what my friend Matthew Hayden, not the cricketer, has chosen in his final video.
So, The Two Doctors, episode 3. And I think I'm allowed 3 choices here, if I understand the rules correctly, Toby. So, first of all, Patrick Troughton again, when he goes full androgam, which is delicious. And I love the fact that he still insists they dress properly to eat, as any gentleman or gentle androgam, if there is such a thing, knows. Top hats in Spain, I think, is my second choice. Nothing much more to say than that. Top hats in Spain. And third, the killing of Oscar. Really quite brutal. And I seem to remember that series was quite controversial for some of its violence and brutality, wasn't it? But really good, I think, to see a lovable character get killed, which, of course, nowadays is 10 a penny in things like Game of Thrones, etc., isn't it? Anyway, thank you so much for inviting me to do this, Toby. I really enjoyed watching them, taking it back to my youth, and I hope you enjoyed it too. See ya.
I feel bad now because Matt is wearing a cravat, and Matt does dress very well and like a gentleman, and this is the first of these. I videoed part 1. I haven't videoed parts 2 and 3 because I'm getting a bit behind with everything and setting up the videos and then editing them and putting them on YouTube to get watched by far fewer people. And because I've had some sort of other pulls on my time with a poorly partner and a need to earn a living, meant something had to give. So I was sort of delayed. There was quite a big gap between part 1 and 2, and it was partially because it's like, oh, I've got to get the tripod out and I've got to set the things up, and then when you edit them, it takes you. So I thought, right, I'm going to motor on. I'm going to get a few of these in the can, and if that means not filming them. But unfortunately, Matt's done sort of visual gags as part of his, and is dressed in a cravat. So imagine a sort of a bald man in a cravat is what Matt is, and who I should have guessed would have, knowing him as I do, would have liked the appeal of the gentleman around Spain. Although he sort of did do that twice. He had the dressing for dinner. Oh no, because he had Patrick Troughton's performance as the anagram. But the gentleman dressing for dinner, and then the top hats. And he did interesting. He chose the murder of Oscar. That is very, very interesting that he chose that. So after a good show in part 2, where I got a point from something I'd chosen in part 1, and I got another point because I kind of gave myself the benefit of the doubt. I didn't get any of that. So I lost again. Which is another another failure to hit the finals board, or to even register on the positive. I've never won, and I will continue not to. But I enjoyed that, although interesting, because I was sort of analysing it a bit more. Its faults did manifest themselves to me in a way that I haven't really cared about before, because I've watched the story purely for entertainment. I'm aware of its faults, but I still like it, and that's okay. What we like doesn't necessarily have to be good, or even to our taste, or we can like in spite of themselves, or in spite of, in fact, the contradictions within themselves. Yeah, which is interesting, and something it will take me a while to digest, which is wholly appropriate. But well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was to your taste, and if it wasn't, there'll be, I'm sure something there is along soon. Nice to do a Colin Baker, because I haven't had a chance to do many of those. Nice to see my friend Matt, and nice to talk to you. I'm going to bed now, so good night, sweet princes and princesses everywhere. Well, thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest for the Two Doctors was Matt Hayden. He can be found on Twitter at MattHayden65. I'm grateful to him and to the many patrons who make this podcast possible, who include Rhys Williams, Rich Wiggins, Peter Ware, Gavin Ware, Alistair Wallace, Jeff Walker, Gary Wales, Lee Wakeley, John Turner, Van Man Sang, Sidney Trutt, Jason Thompson, Paul Taylor-Greaves, Adam Stone, David Spotherth, David Spencer, Richard Smith, Trevor Smith, Brian Sinclair, Paul Shields, John Sheehan, Frank Shales, Edward Salt, Samuel, Tom Selinsky, Gavin Rymel, John Rumpet, Darren Rule, Alex Rowan, Murray Robertson, Paula Reynolds, Peter Reed, Ian Radford, Liam Price, Mary Ann Plicati, John Pettigrew, and Thomas Payne. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. So if you would like to be a patron and add your name to that list, and there are other names too, please go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. £3 a month is the lowest tier, and you can even get 10% off that if you sign up for a year in advance. You get advance releases, bonus material, exclusive. There's one whole exclusive podcast called Far Too Much Information, which is a supplement to the Too Much Information podcasts. There's also monthly Ask Me Anythings. There's pictures of my dog. There's interviews with actors, perhaps related to the Happy Times and Places that haven't been heard anywhere else. All that on my Patreon page. I know a monthly commitment is tough. You could go to Ko-fi. Ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. No inducements there, apart from if you particularly like something I've done, or if I sound or look particularly hungry when you see or hear me, and you are feeling particularly flush and want to bung something in my direction, it will be very much appreciated. But look, what costs you nothing is to go to iTunes, to go to podcasts, Podbean, or wherever you get your podcasts, which is what I sort of was meaning to say before I melded them all together. And just write something nice. 5-star reviews really help to separate these from other podcasts that people might be thinking of looking at. And if people give these a chance, they might enjoy them. But they only know to enjoy them if you tell them by putting your advocacy in cyberspace, official like. So yeah, 5 stars and a lovely review would be great. Alternatively, just tell your friends, especially if you're in the States or Canada or Australia, anywhere outside the UK, really, where I'd love to get my talons a little further into a worldwide listenership, because I hope that this stuff might appeal everywhere. I am slightly more limited by geography with my stand-up comedy, which is every Tuesday at Excess Malarkey Comedy Club in Manchester. Although, if you want to get a sample of a kinder version of it, we went online during lockdown and at twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey. That's an X, an S, and Malarkey, Malarkey. There's me mucking about with acts from the international comedy circuit. We all got together every Tuesday during lockdown to continue to try to provide entertainment, and there's an archive of some of the performances with some amazing comics, from Eddie Pepitone to James Acaster to Randy Feltface to Alice Fraser to Mark Watson, Nish Kumar, Ed Gamble, some really, really fine comics. And it's all up there for free on twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey. I feel a bit for Matt because he went to the trouble of actually recording a video, as quite a few people have done. But the videos, there are some of the Happy Times of Places on my YouTube channel, but they take quite a long time to do and don't get anything like as many people availing themselves of them. So I'm quite busy. So I've put most of my energies into these podcasts. But I have recorded most of them as videos as well. But the Two Doctors, for some reason, I didn't. Now, I should have not done that with some that I guess people had only recorded an audio contribution to, but I didn't really think about it until it was too late. So it's like the Quatermass Experiment episodes 3, 4, 5, and 6 that you will never see me talking about the Two Doctors. So the audio that you have here, there are no pictures. I think I did record some pictures on one of the episodes or 2 of the episodes. I can't remember. I'll have to go through my archive. But there will never be a complete Two Doctors. So if anyone wants to do a sort of telesnap recon of these commentaries, I'll happily put them on YouTube. But that was daft of me. So full of knowledge after the event. I can't even keep up with myself. Anyway, thanks to Matt, and sorry about the lack of pictures.